Tonight's meeting of the Sparta Township Planning Board. This meeting is now called to order. For the record, this meeting is being held on November 6, 2024, at the Sparta Township Municipal Building, located at 65 Main Street, Sparta, New Jersey. The time is now 7 o'clock. It's important to note that the live stream for this meeting may be viewed on YouTube at www.youtube.com/Sparta Township, SPARTATWP. Please note that adequate public notice of this meeting was provided in accordance with the Open Public Meeting Act. So before we start the business tonight, I'd like to ask that everyone please stand and join our board and our professionals as we proudly begin the meeting with a salute to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you, everybody. Before we call the planning board roll call, I just want to make note that we're fortunate to have some special guests joining us tonight. So I'd just like to take a moment to recognize everybody. We have members of the Sparta Township Town Council joining us tonight, so welcome Mayor Clark, Deputy Mayor Dean Blumetti, who's always here with us as a member of the planning board, as well as Councilman Dan Chiarella. So welcome, gentlemen. We've also got Mr. Jim Zepp and our Sparta Township Town Manager, Mr. Corey Stoner, who is our township engineer. So welcome, gentlemen. And Jean, I apologize if thank you, Director of our Town Parks and Recreation. So thanks for being here. We're also pleased to have several members of the Environmental Commission with us tonight. We have Kimberly Noel, who is the chairperson, as well as Neil Salween, who's the vice chairperson, sitting with us. So I was going to have you introduce people, but maybe we'll do that when we do the roll call.
Sure.
Okay. With that, if you could we please call the roll?
Sure. Justin Canellis,
Here.
Ernie Ragsdale,
Here.
Christine Dunbar,
Here.
Mike Sylvester,
Here.
Vice Chairman Bill Enright,
Here.
Chairman Ron Day,
Here.
Deputy Mayor Dean Blumetti,
Here.
Joan Furman,
Here.
Jeanette Berg,
Here.
Celeste Luciano,
Here.
Brian Zimmerman.
Here.
And thank you, Ms. Franklin, for joining us tonight. I know Ms. Huck's going to be here, so thank you for filling in.
You're
Much
welcome.
appreciated.
Mr. Chairman,
Kim?
Mr. Chairman, we should also confirm that this is a joint meeting with the Township Council, and notice of the council meeting was given by the Township Clerk in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act. And Ursula Leo, Tom Ryan's partner, is here for the Township Council. It also happens to be a joint meeting with the Environmental Commission, and it's a good combination of groups. So.
Okay, thank you for that. Kim, do you want to call the roll for the Environmental Commission?
Yes, thank you. Councilman Dan Chiarello? Kimberly Knoll, here. Vice Chair Neil Sauerwein?
Here.
Christine Dunbar? Here. Ted Gall?
Here.
Christine Rogers?
Here.
Linda Tower?
Here.
Barbara Kozaka? Linda Tanieri? Here. Rob Otto?
Here.
And John Groff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think we've got all the introductions out of the way. So tonight, we're going to be talking about 3 topics, each having a potential impact on shaping Sparta's future. The 3 topics will include the Environmental Commission's proposed update to the Open Space and Recreation Plan, which is an element to the master plan. We're going to have a discussion on PDRM2, the max building size, and adding some new required impact statements. And then lastly, we'll have a discussion on Ordinance 2416, which was introduced at the October 24th Town Council meeting. This ordinance pertains to permitting 6 various use classifications for cannabis within Sparta Township. We don't have any public hearings scheduled for tonight, and that was done to ensure we had the proper time to address to all of these subjects. So to prevent everyone from having to listen to me ramble on further, I'm just going to turn the meeting over to Kim Noel.
Yep.
And if you can start with the open space plan, it'd be greatly appreciated.
Thanks so much, Ron. I don't like to beat around the bush, so I'm going to be right up front with what we want the goal of tonight's meeting to be. The Environmental Commission is joining the Planning Board for the second public presentation of the Sparta Township Open Space and Recreation Plan of 2024. Ultimately, the goal is to have the planning board adopt this plan in the December meeting before the end of 2024. I know the public, planning board, council members, and township employees have had access to the plan for several weeks already, but this forum allows for the opportunity to ask questions, make recommendations in real time, and a conversation is always the best and fastest way to get any questions resolved. I also want to reiterate why the extensive revisions of the previous open space plans was undertaken. Barbara, who will introduce in a moment, will give us some more details on this. But basically, in a nutshell, the previous plans were either outdated, quite old, or not comprehensive. Therefore, if you don't know what you got, then you can't protect or preserve it. In order to have a comprehensive view of the beautiful open spaces and recreational spaces that we have, this plan was necessary. The second purpose of the plan is to solidify our open space goals. This was done with input from the public, various township departments, and various commissions and committees. This is the third. The third reason is to create a prioritized list of actions to be taken by SPARTA. This revised open space plan takes the current environment, residents' needs, and funding possibilities into consideration. Therefore, the blueprint to follow is designed to meet our current needs in 2024 and beyond. I do want to take a minute to recognize the huge amount of people that were involved in building this plan. First, there was grant money supplied by New Jersey Highlands Water and Protection Planning Council. Thank you to the Town Council for approval to move forward. I want to thank every resident that took the time to share their feedback and insights. I want to recognize the OSRP subcommittee, which is Neil Sauerwein, Christine Casco, Corey Stoner, Christine Dunbar, and Linda Tower, and the entire Environmental Commission for their valuable input and revisions. The Tax Assessor's Office did much review of deeds and tax records. Jim Zepp and his office, including Michelle Landau, for additional research and assistance. Jean Montemanero for leading amazing tours of our parks and recreation areas and insights into the town's needs. And finally, Barbara Davis from the Land Conservancy of New Jersey for leading us in this journey. I've really appreciated your extensive knowledge and your clear leadership in guiding us through this process. So Barbara, I'm going to turn it over to you for further introductions.
All right, if I stand up. I'm going to use this. Can you hear me? And does it get through if I stand up? You guys, you're okay? All right, just want to make sure I'm just more comfortable standing up. All right, so my name is Barbara Heskins Davis. I'm a licensed planner and I work for the Land Conservancy of New Jersey. We were hired by Sparta Township to update its open space and recreation plan. Just to give you some faith that I know what I'm doing, the Land Conservancy has written 220 land conservation plans, of which over 100 have been open space and recreation plans, and I've been involved with each one of those. I've wanted to work in Sparta for a really long time, and I was very excited and appreciative of the opportunity to work here. I live in Randolph, so I'm a neighbor of Sparta Township. I've hiked here, I've shopped here, I've eaten here, and it's really nice to get to know the town just a little bit better. So what I want to be able to do tonight is to present your open space and recreation plan update. I'm going to drill down to some of the things that I want to make sure that you hear from me tonight and that I have a chance to answer. What I have before me are the decision makers within the municipality, and I'm going to take full advantage of that opportunity. As I mentioned, I've done a lot of open space and recreation plans. There's only one town that has had a joint meeting with the Environmental Commission, the governing body, and the planning board to review that plan, and that's Sparta Township. So I think you should feel really good about that.
Barbara, if I could, I'm going to ask, is it possible to use that mic only because sometimes when you turn, they may not hear it at home? Oh, if that's easier.
This one working?
Thank you.
Sorry, thank you very much. Button.
This is going to be the same.
We're just going to skip over the second slide. All right, so why are we updating the open space and recreation plan? As Kim mentioned, we're updating the open space and recreation plan basically because your plans are way out of date. Your first plan was done in 1997. It was a really good plan in 1997. I want to just reassure you, it was a really good plan. We used a lot of the concepts that were in the 1997 plan to help guide the thought process for the 2024 plan. You updated it in 2003, that was okay. You updated again in 2020, that was not. So your open space and recreation plan really goes back to 1997. One of the things that we wanted to be able to do right off was to get an idea of what Sparta Township residents really think. And of course, you can always do more and you can always do it differently, but it worked out really well. We had a meeting in June and it was attended by both in person and by people on the YouTube channel. And we did an interactive exercise using the internet so people were able to participate. And then we got to talking with the Environmental Commission almost immediately after the meeting, and we said, the survey's good. It worked. Why don't we put it out on the website? And the town immediately did. They put it on the website, they advertised it, they had it out on social media, and we had 334 responses to the survey, which is great. So we were able to get a more well-rounded view of what residents think in Sparta Township. On the slide in front of me, you can see in that word cloud some of the words that we heard over and over again. The bigger the word, the more that we heard. Schools are important. The fact that it's a small rural town, community kept coming up over and over again. Nature, safety, peaceful landscape, open space. It just, you can see the words being repeated. Recreation came up, but for those who were filling it out, this is my interpretation. Your recreation program is so good and your recreation facilities are so good that I think people take it for granted. So that when they talked about what they needed, they added other things. So I want to emphasize that even though recreation might be in little letters, it's not because it's not really important. It's because it's so good in Sparta Township. So I hope that that makes sense. Did it work? Sugars. I don't know why.
You got to click the mouse.
Sorry.
Are the arrows or space bars?
Okay, spacebar worked. Okay. Okay, thank you, sorry. All right, so this just gives you kind of a brief history of the open space program. I have gone over it. 1997 was your first open space plan. You did start collect a tax in 2000. You started at 2 cents, you went down to 1 cent. It's all good. The Scott Farm was preserved in 2002. You did receive 3 grant awards from Sussex County for 3 different open space projects. And you've had a good partnership with the Wallkill River Watershed Management Group for tree planting at Station Park. And in 2021, you acquired Yonkers Landing, which is a really neat addition. It connects the Glen to a new neighborhood within Sparta Township. And in 2024, you got over $500,000 from Green Acres to put in an all-inclusive park at Station Park. Now that all-inclusive playground, this is a big deal. Green Acres is going to do it in one more round in 2025. It's very competitive funding. Sparta's only one of 2 towns in this area that got that funding. So it's a really nice achievement. Okay, so if I was mayor of Sparta, and for these couple of minutes I'm going to be mayor, sorry, mayor, I want to be able to say how much I've brought in my funding, right? So what has Sparta raised and what has it brought in outside funding? Now, Sparta's had a very interesting history in terms of your open space program and in your funding program. Sparta has really been a self-funded municipality. Okay, so if you look at the column on the right, you raise somewhere around $340,000 a year in your open space trust fund, and it's at about a cent. And since 2001, as of the end of last year, you've collected 4.6 million. So that's a significant amount of money that you've raised. You did get 3 grants for open space from Sussex County at just under $250,000, and you've preserved several farms, I think 6, and you've had just about $860,000 in county farmland grants. New Jersey, as I mentioned, you got a Green Acres grant, and you've also gotten just under $1 million from the state for farmland projects. So you've brought in, almost, looks like almost $3 million in matching funds. And you have really only gotten Green Acres grants once last year. So all of the land that you have and the parks that you've improved, you've done that through a very judicious use of your local open space trust fund. So here's your inventory of open space. 71% of all the land that's preserved in Sparta Township is owned by the state of New Jersey in a variety of different wildlife management areas and preserves and parks. Sparta Township itself has 310 acres of what I would consider parkland. Ogdensburg, interestingly enough, owns 66 acres, which I think is part of their Heaters Park. The Passaic River Coalition and New Jersey Audubon own 2 preserves that are part of Sparta Mountain. You have 5 farms that are preserved that are just under 200 acres. And here's the kicker. This is the last one, open space dedications. And I'm going to go over this. So this is when I start to get a little assertive. And since I'm the one talking, we're just going to have to all take a deep breath and say that's okay. All right. So here's a clip of your open space map. Okay. So anything that's green is permanently protected, regardless of who owns it. So you have the Glen, you have Station Park, you have Kittatinny Valley State Park, which is part of the DEP state land, you have the Wallkill Preserve. So you can see all of those in green on your map. The orangey red properties, those are the open space dedications just in and around this area. The blue around Morris Lake is owned by the Town of Newton's Water Commission. And the brown is preserved farmland. The purple is public property, and the pink is school. So you can see the high school and the middle school. Okay, so let's kind of get down to brass tacks here. So Sparta Township, prior to 2024, had never accepted state funding. So what does it mean to have accepted state funding? If you accept state funding, then you have to put together what's called a recreation and open space inventory, or a ROSI or a ROSI. I say it both ways. So a ROSI is a contract between the town and the state that says, I, the town, own all of this land for parkland, and I promise that I will always use it for parkland forever. Love the town. And you submit it to the state of New Jersey. The state of New Jersey signs off on it. And then your attorney, so Mr. Collins, is going to put a deed restriction on all of those properties that you list on your ROSI and file it with the county clerk. So if there's ever a problem or you ever need to do a title search, the deed restriction comes up and it's always noted as permanently protected. Sparta has resisted having a ROSI in the past. You have never accepted state funding up until last year. Now that you've accepted state funding, you're required to put together that ROSI. So the ROSI will have to be signed by the chair of the planning board and by the mayor. So it's good that we have both individuals here. I'm no longer the mayor. That was only for the money part, not for the signing part. So in doing the open space and recreation plan, we follow Green Acres guidelines, but we also use, my experience. I've been with the Conservancy for 25 years. And I think for the open space and recreation plan, there's really a couple of sections that are most important, right? Why do you want to preserve land? Your goals, that's important. Your funding, again, what have you raised and what have you brought in? What do you want to do with it? The recommendations. And then this last one, what's permanently protected? And in Sparta, that's a real trick, right? So in Sparta, you don't have a Rossi in place. So you're relying on local knowledge to tell you what's a park and what's not a park. And you do have parks. You have beautiful parks. You have the Station Park, you have the Glen, you have Ungermeyer Park, you have Edison Park. There's a whole variety of parks. And we went back with Jean and we said, Jean, what do you identify as a park? What do you manage as a park? And then we really grilled her. We were not very nice to Jean. You know, we said, okay, that property is a park. What about the property right next to it that's owned by the town? She said, no, we don't consider that a park. So we didn't identify it as a park. But it's an interesting concept, right? So the plan in the appendix, and I went over this with your engineer, lists all the properties that the Recreation Department agrees is identified, managed, and used as a park. And that's your 310 acres. That does include the 3 properties that you received county open space funding for, because those are restricted properties. Okay. Now, let's talk about these open space dedications. So they're an interesting group, right? We didn't know about it. When we were doing your plan, like I said, we were really relying on the 1997 plan. And then I thought, I'm not doing my job very well. I better look at that 2003 plan. So I opened up the 2003 plan, and sure enough, in the appendix of the 2003 plan, they say the town owns 760 acres of land, or that's considered an open space dedication. Really? Okay. So what is that? So we contacted the manager's office and the tax assessor's office, and sure enough, there's a whole series of properties that are divided into 2. One, Sparta owns, and they're part of these open space dedications, so they own them outright. And 2, there's a set of properties that are privately owned, but when they were developed and through the planning board process, they were restricted for open space use. So that adds up to it's actually about 834 acres, because Tom read the plan and identified 2 additional properties. Those 800 and some odd acres have to be listed on your Rossi as well. So because they have restrictions on them, because they were done through the planning board process, they need to be listed. I spoke to your engineer about the Rossi, and because it's a brand new Rossi, you should be extra super careful about what's listed and what's on it. So if you have, and I don't know, so I'm just making this part up, like at White Lake, let's say there's a water line that goes through the park. That part of the park that has the water line has to be accepted out from being listed as a park. Any type of public infrastructure that's on what you consider parkland, do not put on your Rossi, because if you have to service that public infrastructure at any point in the future, it's considered a diversion. So if there's anything that's going to come out of this open space and recreation plan, it's the work that we did on identifying what is permanently protected and why, so that you can go ahead and put together that Rossi with confidence that you're listing what really is a park, what really is deed restricted, and you don't have to go back and forth with Green Acres arguing with them about what is or what is not a park, because you've done all that legwork already. And your engineer is very well aware of where that public infrastructure is. So the plan has to have a needs analysis, and it has to have recommendations. So we went and, as a direct result of the surveys, talked about why open space is important in the municipality. And we talked about public health benefits. We talked about water benefits, natural resources, recreation, wildlife habitat, and homeowner value, which is a real thing. And then we gave a series of recommendations, and they're really in these 7 buckets. We looked at each one of your parks. I think this is the easy lift, and we'll talk about that and how to expand them. To update and expand your recreation facilities. This is a direct result of the recommendations provided to us by Jean on the tours. She was very clear as to what she feels your parks could use in order to improve and how to do it. And also the surveys. A lot of people put down different ideas about what they'd like to see in your parks. Trails. super important and a great opportunity in Sparta Township. As Kim mentioned in her introduction, the plan is being underwritten completely by a grant from the Highlands Council. The Highlands Council also has funding to do trails planning, and I would very much recommend that the town consider, once they adopt this plan, to ask the Highlands Council to fund a trails plan. I think that that would be a really good next step for the municipality and give you that on-the-ground information that you're looking for to do the connections that your residents are asking for. Preserving farmland, connecting wildlife habitat, maintaining water quality, and supporting native plantings. So let's kind of roll through those quick. So grow your parks. There's opportunities in Sparta Township, as I mentioned before, where you own land right next to parks that you're not using as part of the parks. You know, in my view, I think you are using them as parks, you're just not managing them as parks. Ungerman Park is a really good example of that, where you have municipal property that is not identified by your recreation department as really part of the park, but on the ground, it's really part of your park. And it's an easy lift to increase your park inventory. Morris Lake, the Newton Reservoir, I'd really like to see that have a deed restriction on it. It's a huge property, it's beautiful. Right now, it has no deed restrictions on it. And that's not really a Sparta thing, because it's not your land. But boy, I think you have a voice in talking to the state of New Jersey about doing that. Really, the right answer for the Newton Reservoir is to have the DEP own an easement on that land. And they do that for a whole lot of other water supply sources. And I'd really like to see that at Morris Lake. Another one, I'm not sure if we put it in this presentation. No, another opportunity that's in the plan is the Glen. You own a lot of public land surrounding the Glen. I'd like to see that added to the park. And as I mentioned, the recreation director had a lot of good comments about how to expand and improve recreational facilities. So we include that in the report as kind of a suggested list. Trail connections. A lot of trails were discussed. We had several meetings to talk about it. There's a lot of mapping in the plan that talks about trail connections. They are listed up here. I think there are ways to connect people to resources within the municipality, and it can be done easily. And there are a lot of good ideas out there that would really be a nice amenity for the municipality. And the trails can take all different forms. You can have the paved trails. Like I think parts of the Walco River Trail by Ungerman would be really nice paved. Though connecting the high school and the middle school. This Iron Horse Trail, which would be a rail trail, is a really neat historic type of amenity that would be nice to include. It's all publicly owned. Actually putting an extension where they already own land for the Polonska Valley Trail, it'd be nice for Sparta to advocate with the state to do that. So there's different ideas and thoughts with respect to trails. Preserving farmland. So this is a plug for my other project. We're currently updating Sussex County's farmland plan. So I don't know if anyone from the municipality like Jim Hall or Corey Stoner would want to be on the call Tuesday to talk about farmland programming for Sussex County. But now's a good time to get Sparta's farms that you want to see preserved identified in Sussex County's plan. So definitely contact me with any questions. Wildlife habitat, we talk about connections for wildlife habitat in the plan. Water quality, the Land Conservancy actually updated Sussex County's open space plan in 2016 with an eye towards water quality preservation, and we put that in the report. And native plantings are really important for the landscape and would make a nice difference. So this is kind of where we're at. We've written the plan. We're at the second public meeting. Green Acres requires 2. After this meeting, we'll provide a final report, and then we're hopeful that it'll be adopted next month. And with that, I thank you. I'm going to ask that the board ask their questions, maybe the council, and then we do have to open it up to the public. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much. What we typically do, let me give our professionals a chance, if that's okay, to ask questions, and then we'll follow it up down the dais here. So Catherine, do you want to start?
Thank you very much to all the work that was put into this. I think it's incredibly well-done plan, very thorough, includes a lot of information. And the only question that I had was related to the last kind of segment. You talked about trails. I didn't know, the way that it was presented in the plan was kind of in piecemeal, and one of my recommendations would be if there was an overall Sparta Trails plan to show kind of the existing gaps in connectivity, and then also maybe beyond the information in the document, if it would be possible to make a recommendation that the Environmental Commission or another Sparta committee maybe take on, like as a Trails Advisory Committee, or some sort of establishment of something that would help to fill in the gaps for trails. I've seen in other places where they can help inform and help create a trails map that may include like bike trails, ped trails, and then also like trails that connect on roadways or sidewalk areas to help build a bigger trails map.
Yeah, I agree with all of your thoughts. I really think that that's the next step for Sparta. So I can add a recommendation in the action plan that Sparta consider, I thought I put it in, but I'll double check, putting together a trails plan and a trails map and creating some kind of advisory committee to do that. So I'll add
I'll
that.
just add to that we do have a Trails Committee. It was founded this year. And in fact, our next meeting, or an inaugural meeting, is tomorrow night at 7 p.m. So we'll get the process underway tomorrow.
Great.
And thank you, again, very well done job.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Simmons?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The one part of the plan which I thought was very well done, thank you, that I did want to touch on was the Sparta Glen and the Morris Lake area. In particular, with regards to the Rossi, as Barbara said, it's important to identify any existing infrastructure that's there that has to be basically accepted out. And just by way of 2-second history, starting back in 1895, that's when the first transmission main from Morris Lake to Newton was constructed. And it went under Lower Glen Lake and also down through Sparta Glen and down to Main Street, and then about 8 miles overland through Sparta and Andover Township to the town of Newton. Then around the 1950s, there was a second transmission main added. That was a 16-inch main. And the first part in the 50s went from Newton around Diller Avenue roughly to and back of the Sparta Presbyterian Church, the cemetery, and that's where it stopped. And then in the mid-70s, it went from that point up Main Street, up Glen Road, through Sparta Glen, and ultimately up to Morris Lake to increase the capacity of water. In or around August of 2000, the flood came through Sparta and wiped the transmission mains out in Sparta Glen. And as a result of that, when Glen Road was reconstructed and what have you, there was a new 20-inch transmission main for about a mile long run from Glen Road all the way up to Morris Lake Road. My point with just highlighting that, there's some easements in place for all those transmission mains, and you mentioned before they had to be accepted out. So on the journey that water takes from Morris Lake all the way to the town of Newton, where it goes through Sparta, I'm sure even on Fox Hollow Lake, where there was a new transmission main put in, there's areas where I think it'd be important, if you're going to do a Rossi, to make sure those are accepted out.
Okay, thank you. Anything else?
That's it right now.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, Tom, anything on your part?
Nothing to add,
Ernie?
Mr. Chairman.
I'm fine, thank you. The plan is brilliant.
Hi, good evening. Quick question regarding the funding aspects. Are the any and all environmental studies included in the grant funding provided by the state and prior to and/or putting these pieces together in place? 1 and 2, the maintenance required, and the impacts to the town, if any, is that funded by the program as well?
That's a great question. So I'm going to answer it, and if I start to answer it incorrectly, if I didn't understand it, just stop me, okay? So Green Acres has several pots of funding. You're doing this plan in order to access the land acquisition pot, if you wanted to acquire additional land. They also have park development funding, which is where you got the funding for the Station Park all-inclusive playground. The third pot is stewardship funding. And the concept there is that it would be a big project because the minimum ask is $50,000, so you're looking at a $100,000 project. So it's really something that if you're going to do a large-scale park improvement with respect to the land management of it, that you could apply to Green Acres for that funding. The ongoing maintenance of a park is not covered by state grant funding. That's really where your open space trust could be used for park development and park maintenance.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Davis, thank you for a great presentation. I just have a couple questions. Can you give us a little bit more context around sustainable Jersey certification and what the 10 points that we would get for updating the open space plan is?
Yeah, that's another good question. There's a lot of Sparta that needs to be covered. So Sustainable Jersey is a program in New Jersey that's not run by the state. It's kind of quasi-governmental. And I think of the 465 municipalities, something like 400 are registered, of which Sparta is one. And in order to be certified through the Sustainable Jersey program, you need to accumulate a certain number of points that indicate that you're managing and running your municipality in a green way. And it's not necessarily green with respect to natural resources. It could be a whole variety of things. If you have EV vehicles, if you're using cleaners that are green, if you are reducing your paper load, and in this case, if you're doing planning that supports protection of your environment. So like a natural resource inventory is considered a priority action and is 20 points. Having an open space plan is 10 points. To be, I believe, to be bronze certified, you need 180 points. So that this gets you on the path towards that.
You gave some recommendations for some new facilities. And you said, consider resident recommendations. Would the town be putting out some kind of survey? Is that how the other towns that you would work with? Or how do they get community feedback?
So it's a good question. Sparta's done it in different ways. In 2019, you had a public survey that we used as part of this. And then for this plan, we put out a survey that was very general, that received a lot of comments. You can do the public outreach via social media platforms. You can have a survey. It's really up to your recreation department and your planner how or whether you want to get public input on recreation improvement. My suggestion with respect to recreation improvement is to listen to your recreation director. She's very good. And you probably should have some kind of plan that, identifies all of your parks and which facilities and how they can be used. Some of them are a bit outdated, which is not unusual for a town like Sparta. But you would benefit from kind of giving it that thought and that engagement.
Thank you, Ms. Davis.
Okay. Again, thank you. I read through the document a couple times, and I really enjoyed it because I just never realized that Sparta had such great places in town, so many parks and things to do. And, I remember when I first moved into town, like, where do you go for this or where do you go for that? And this plan laid it out all very nicely, so very well done. Thank you. Thank you to everybody. Couple questions. So in terms of the plan itself, it's called an update, but if I'm understanding it correctly, this is really going to be the plan. It supersedes everything that came before it, and just this is the plan. This is everything this is what we'll refer to going forward.
Correct.
Okay, thanks. In the plan, it was mentioned there was a 2003 update and a 2020 update. Would it be possible to get copies of those?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Relative to green space funding and the Rossi, just want to make sure that I understand. So, so everything, I believe it's just Sparta-owned, Sparta Township-owned properties. There's other lands out there, open space lands that are privately owned, and they would not go in the Rossi. It's just the Sparta Township. Is that correct?
No.
Okay.
So anything that's owned by Sparta Township that is used as a park or as part of those open space dedications has to be on your Rossi. You do own easements on about 300, maybe 400 acres of land. And there's a separate section on the Rossi for easement properties, so you would have to list those on your Rossi.
Okay, thanks. And the last question I have is, so and if we were to acquire more properties in the future, would they also need to be added to the Rossi, or are they outside of the Rossi now?
So so the Rossi has to be current as of 2024, because that's the year that you accepted the state funding. If you decide not to accept state funding in the future, your Rossi would stand at 2024.
Great.
You only update your Rossi when you go to next receive state funding through the Green Acres program.
Okay. All right, thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Davis and the Land Conservancy of New Jersey. This is, the analysis and the plan are excellent, very comprehensive. It was, like the chairman said, it was wonderful reading through it. It was educational and inspirational. Also, thanks to the Environmental Commission and the Open Space Subcommittee and all of our township employees who also contributed, I'm sure, lots of time and effort. And one clarification on the Sustainable Jersey, just to confirm, we are bronze certified, and we'll need to recertify again in the next year or two. I have one question. It's about the New Jersey Conservation Blueprint page that's in this document. I have some familiarity with the tool and the methodology for that. How do you recommend that we use the information coming out of the New Jersey Conservation Blueprint? I saw there's a few areas just mentioned in there about where they are in town. Any recommendations how we go beyond that and incorporate those into some of our planning?
Right, so that's a good question. So I told your town manager prior to the meeting that Green Acres released updated guidelines for open space and recreation plans 2 weeks ago. So Sparta's getting in on the old guidelines, which makes me happy. The new guidelines emphasizes the use of the Conservation Blueprint tool. So the question is well placed. Conservation Blueprint is an interesting site, so just Google it in order to get on it. There's really two benefits to it. One is the planning benefit. The planning benefit is that there's a lot of information in there about the ecological, the community, the water quality benefits, or value of land. And it was done with an input of a lot of different data sources. It's really only as good as the information that's put in, but the information's pretty good. And it gives you a general idea about why a property would be important in several different buckets. So that's one value in terms of planning, especially I think for the Environmental Commission, as you review development applications, it's not a bad idea to go on Conservation Blueprint and look at that site and see how it falls within their buckets of what's important. The second advantage of Conservation Blueprint is the block lot information that it has in there. You can really dig down to the parcel level, and it has a variety of different layers in it that you can start to pull up and turn on and off that can give you a lot of information about how things connect. We use the Conservation Blueprint tool in nearly all of the mapping in the recommendations section of your plan. So you can see how we used it and what we thought was a benefit in trying to identify those interconnections for the municipality. So I think it's a really good tool. It's not that hard to use. And you would just, I think it's NJ Mapper too, but just Google Conservation Blueprint.
Okay, great, appreciate it, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
On your map, I don't show the Wallkill River coming out of Lake Mohawk until it almost gets to Station Park. I've always been interested in developing a trail along the Wallkill River, but I don't know how to go about doing that.
So my suggestion, and it's similar to what I suggested to the planner, is that whenever you do a trail plan, the first thing is to walk it, to go out and walk it. And we need better mapping in Sparta Township to show where those trail connections would be. So the Conservation Blueprint tool might be a good place to start with respect to the mapping. It has good aerial photographs in there. having that trail advisory committee, you could bring it up to them and see if they could take a walk. And I would get Lake Mohawk Country Club involved as well.
Okay. I just echo what everybody else says. Thank you. You did an absolutely phenomenal job, and I, too, enjoyed reading this. When I first saw 120-something pages, I thought, oh, but I actually did enjoy it. Is there any land that Sparta owns that is not listed in the open space dedications, that may be for some other purpose?
Yes, in the appendix, we have a list of all the publicly owned land. So there's a table that has the open space dedications, and then following it, there's a series of tables that lists all the land that's owned by Sparta Township. And it's also on the map. So I'll be sure to give your engineer the GIS data once we're done, so that they can then use that.
All right, great. That'd be good to incorporate. My other question is, since this open space dedication is going into the Rossi, if for some reason in the future we decide we need it for something, what is the process?
Okay.
How long does that take? What is involved in turning it back?
So I would say it's not really a time issue, it's a cost issue. So, it's not a positive. So if you think about it from the perspective of the state of New Jersey, a recreation and open space inventory was set up because when the Green Acres program first started back in 1964, they awarded funds, and it was the bigger cities that, applied for and received the funds. In order for these locations to buy the parks, they sold off old parks, which was antithetical to what Green Acres was trying to do. So they set up this Rossi that was a requirement, that they didn't want the inventory of parkland to decrease. So you had to agree that this was all of your parks. So if you're agreeing that these are all your parks, then they set up a punitive system for you if you wanted to reduce the amount of parkland that you had for whatever reason. So they have different variations of, what your punishment, so to speak, would be if you removed parkland from your Rossi. So if it's going to be used for another public purpose, that has one level. If it's going to be used, and it's a public purpose that has an open, a benefit. If it's a public purpose that's like for a road, maybe not, you have a bigger issue. If you're going to sell it for private use, sometimes they don't know what the punitive damage would be. I'll give you an example. We were working in East Hanover Township, and they have Lurker Park that goes around so wetlands by the Passaic River. And there's a Dunkin' Donuts that's on the edge of Lurker Park. And Dunkin' Donuts wanted to expand their parking lot. So they contacted the municipality and said, we'd like to purchase 10, 15 feet of the wooded land right next to us, and it's owned by the town. The town did a title search came out fine, and the town said, sure, we'll sell it to you. So they sold the 15 feet, and someone was having coffee at Dunkin' Donuts and knew the history of Lurker Park and contacted the state of New Jersey. And it turns out that the attorney for that town didn't properly put the restriction in the title work, so that's why the restriction didn't come up. And the property that the town had sold was not only on the Rossi, it had been funded with state funds and federal funds, and they didn't know what the punitive value would be. So the town was able to undo the sale and restore the property in order to avoid any problem. But it's really an issue. The other example I can share, and especially since your engineer is here, this was years ago in Chatham Borough, or Chatham Township, but one of the Chathams, they had a park and their water line ran underneath the park, and they hadn't accepted out the water line. And they needed to dig up the ground in order to replace the piping for the water line, and it was considered a diversion, and they had to go to the State House Commission for permission to manage their own infrastructure. So take your time with the Rossi, really think it through. Now's the opportunity to do that. If you're unsure of any of the properties that we've identified as an open space dedication, we were really clear in the appendix that this was provided by the tax assessor. We didn't look at any deeds, that you should do a title search and check the deeds and see what it says. So you're totally on point. You want to think now about that property and whether or not there's any other potential use. If something has a detention basin on it, don't put it on the Rossi. Keep it off, because you might have to manage that detention basin. And if Green Acres comes back and says, but it's managed as open space, you tell them it's got a detention basin on it. This is a public infrastructure. It's, it's stormwater control. So you just, you're absolutely on point. You just need to be thoughtful about it and take your time now. They'll understand.
Okay. As a follow-up to that, what about something that's proposed? Can you X that out as well? Maybe propose sewer lines, if there are plans down the road that you might want to use as a connection, can you, in the Rossi?
As long as you can defend that proposal. So if it's in a master plan somewhere, for community facilities map, somewhere in the municipality, you just want to be able to justify. If you have, a fair share housing agreement, and as part of that, I'm just making this up, and as part of that agreement, you agree that you're going to provide water and sewer to that development, and it's going to go through the edge of, one of your parks, then yes, you can accept that out. And that's the whole point of being thoughtful. As your engineer mentioned, though, the water mains that go through from one park to another, those easements are old, and, you'll need to look at those. But take your time now. Green Acres will be patient.
Okay, is there a timeline that when this Rossi has to be filed?
Well, that's going to be, I think Jean will be the right person to figure that out, because she applied for the Green Acres funding. So you should talk to your Green Acres representative. Because this is a brand-new Rossi and you're a mature town, they're going to understand that there's a lot involved. Green Acres and the Highlands Council both read your draft open space and recreation plan. I wanted no surprises when you went to adopt it. Both have approved it, and Green Acres did read through the recommendations in the report, so they're aware of kind of what the issues are that you're going to be dealing with.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you again for the very thorough and excellent report. I just have one question. Since much of this plan's goals are to maintain high water quality and practice stewardship and conservation, how are we addressing brownfields in town for future use and redevelopment?
That is a really good question, and is one that can be directed to your planner. So it's not part of your open space plan, but I think it's a really good point.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I'll
Yeah.
just repeat the question.
So much of this plan's point is to maintain high water quality and practice stewardship and conservation. So how are we, or are we even, addressing brownfields in town for future redevelopment?
Yes, and Jenna and I had spoke a little bit earlier about brownfields and also known contaminated sites. So not every known contaminated site is a brownfield, but I actually had a chance to look through some of the publicly available data on contaminated sites in the town that are active right now, so we can get kind of a threshold idea of what exists. All of those are regulated via the NJDEP, so they'll have, if they do require cleanup for future development, they'll have what's known as a LSRP, a licensed site remediation professional, and they'll have an account. So all that's publicly available. So if we want to look deeply into that, it's not necessarily open space. That's more of like an environmental concern. Mm-hmm. It can be looped into the master plan that we're working on as well, so that there is kind of a point in time understanding of what kind of contamination exists, what's been actively looked at by the DEP. And those could be a range of things. They can be like contamination from a gas station that has underground tanks, or a leaking even residential gas tank that might have, oil tank that may have like groundwater contamination or offsite contamination. Any sites that are contaminated that are looking to redevelop, that are actively regulated by the DEP do have to clean up to certain standards. So if it goes from an industrial use to a residential use or something, they have higher standards, even for open space and things like that. So we can loop that information into the master plan. I think, I agree, this is less of an open space issue, but more of an environmental issue.
Great, thank you. It also would be good to see where they are.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Just to get a map. Thank
If
you.
I may, I'd like to add, I mean, they kind of run parallel to support the question. I mean, as we work this open space farm preservation program, a brownfields program goes hand in glove with it. Brownfields gets extra credits, extra funding to, upon remediation, to be able to convert into some open space recreational. You get, there's the funds that are available, get additional funding awards based on that type of, level of cleanup and use. So it should be looked at comprehensively and overall with the amount of availability and space we have.
And Mike is he's an expert in the environmental, the technical expert, so he knows. But there are, grants and things like that we can identify as part of the master plan to talk about either grants or that the EDA puts out or other kind of land conservation incentives to help remediate brownfield sites.
Thank you.
I don't have a question. I just have a comment. Really just want to say thank you to everyone involved. And I want to say how excited I am about taking this information, bringing it to the master plan subcommittee once it's fully adopted, and overlaying this on top of our master plan to get us a bit closer to where we really need to be. I am truly thankful and grateful that you guys have put in the time and effort and the experience and the information that's here that's so useful to us. So I just want to express gratitude, and I'm looking forward to working very closely with this document in the future. Thank you.
I want to thank you as well for the lovely presentation. My questions were answered, but I do want to expand a little bit. The property north of the Glen being public property, we did confirm that it is owned by Sparta. I think it'd be wonderful to see some expansion in the Glen, as I personally actively use that. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
All right, before we go to the public, Mayor Clark or Councilman Chiarello, any questions or comments that you'd like to make?
Thank you. I'll just make one request and one comment. I'm hoping that someone from the Environmental Commission can offer up, if I can tease out of you, a little bit of update on the sustainable Jersey and where we are and what our next steps are, because that came up and I think that's an important topic. The one question I had was, as a taxpayer who pays property taxes, there's 4 buckets of taxes that come out of your check when you cut that check. Municipal taxes, your library tax, your county tax, and your open space fund. Maybe I'm missing one, but I think those are the 4. 3 of those are governed by a budget. So if somebody wants to know where my county taxes are going, you have a budget that tells you exactly what's going on. Municipal taxes, library, all of those things are governed by budgets. To my knowledge, we don't have a budget that governs open space, so it's a bucket of money that sits around until someone dreams up a use for it. And that's, I don't mean to be unkind or glib about it, but because it's not governed by a budget, I've always thought that was a gap in a control that we could have. So I was always interested in coming up with a plan for using open space. And of course, plans can change, but as a taxpayer, I should see I'm taking that penny out of my taxes, or the $340,000 that we accumulate every year out of the taxes, and know that this is where we plan to use that money. Maybe some of it is going to pay off past debts or service certain bonds, and some of it in future we have certain plans for, a park development or whatever. So I guess my question there is, does an open space budget, is that common for municipalities to adopt? And if so, does that fit into a open space plan?
So I think that's a really good question. And different towns do it differently. Here's my recommendation for Sparta Township. You have a very active environmental commission, and you have a group that served as an open space subcommittee to develop this plan. So they're very informed as to how the plan was developed and what the recommendations are. I think you should formalize that open space subcommittee as part of the Environmental Commission and charge them with putting together a recommendation for your open space program. An open space budget is a good idea. So the town council is the one that controls the open space expenditures. The advisory committee or the commission can only provide recommendations. Different towns do it different ways. One of my favorite, and I think I mentioned it to the Environmental Commission on the tour, is Madison Borough. What they do with their Open Space Trust Fund is that the Open Space Committee receives applications from different departments and different committees within the municipality. And they review them and provide recommendations to the governing body for expenditures. So if if the Trails Committee wants to put in a new trail within the municipality, they form a budget, they provide the Open Space Committee with an idea of how they want it built, just general and how they see the matching funds, and the Open Space Committee provides a recommendation. Same thing with historic or recreation. And it's a really good way to have community engagement in your open space program, and it's consistent with the recommendations in your open space plan. And if it's something that interests Sparta, I can certainly connect you with the chair of that Open Space Committee. But I have found that to be probably one of the most equitable ways to start to take a deep dive into what your open space trust is and how it's expended. And then you could start to budget in, well, if you want to acquire a new piece of property, rather than being told there's no money and having no understanding as to why there's no money, then you've got an informed group that says, okay, 25% of my budget is obligated for past debt and 25% has been earmarked for this improvement project, but I have X amount of dollars that I could start to budget for a different use. So that would be my recommendation.
So we can put a structure in place in your plan or somewhere else, and you just talked about how we would apply that structure to.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Neil is in charge of our Sustainable New Jersey Subcommittee, so I'm going to let him answer that question. But before we go there, we're talking about a much larger plan that is on the website, just so that everybody in the room understands. I know you didn't get a 125-page document, right? We're trying to save paper. So the reference that Barbara made earlier is to the entire document that is on the website.
Thanks, Kim. I just want to clarify that Sparta has had bronze status in the Sustainable Jersey program, which is expiring in 2025, so we need to recertify, and this will be a valuable help to us for additional points in maybe possibly reaching silver status someday.
Can I ask a question? In your recommendations to expand parks, was that done with the intention of making the expansion recreation facilities, or was it done with the intention of conserving wildlife habitat, or just proximity? Like, could you give a sort of a description or maybe a percentage of which expansions cover which?
It was really on a place-by-place basis. Like Ungerman Park, it would be facility-based. That's really the best use of that land that surrounds that. The Glen, it's all wildlife habitat, and it would help protect those corridors of, that are used right now. It would formalize it and make sure that it's protected in the future. So you'd really have to go through the document and look at it kind of on a site-by-site basis. Sparta surprisingly owns land that is completely inaccessible and interior to and surrounded by state-owned land. So here's my recommendation for that, is that Sparta should consider transferring ownership of those properties to the state, but get money for it. So, it's been done with other municipalities, but, you're thinking about the best management of those lands, and that's really where it is. So we didn't make I don't have an overall percentage for you. It was really more on a site-by-site basis.
Thinking about the maintenance question and the expense of maintaining the expanded parks. So if there is some percentage of the expansion, and we sort of pick and choose as a town where we want to expand or when we can expand, and those decisions can be made with the knowledge of whether or not we're going to use it as like a labor-intensive recreation facility or something that we can purchase and manage as a forever wild. So those are choices we can make.
Correct.
On the maintenance piece.
Correct. Right. And you don't have to develop a park right away. You know, it could be part of that 10-year plan. You know, White Lake Park is a great example of that. You're very thoughtful about how you develop that park. And there's a lot of opportunities at that park.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who put so much time and effort into it. It shows, and I'm glad that we have all the kind of relevant stakeholders here to provide input. Just one question, kind of a minutia question, which is for the properties that you identified as dedicated open space, must those be included on the ROSI, or does the township have any flexibility with that, provided that they're not located next to critical infrastructure, so they can avoid the clawback provisions that you spoke of, saying, hey, we know this is dedicated open space, but we're not sure what's going to happen to it. We're just going to keep it off for flexibility purpose. Do we have the ability to do that, or must we put it on the ROSI?
It really depends on how it was protected. You know, we're relying on that list from what the tax assessor provided to us, that these were done as part of the planning board approval process. So, you know, my recommendation is that you take the time to ask someone to look at the deeds or look at the resolutions that set aside that land to see how it's worded. If the wording is such that they were set aside for open space purposes only, you know, you may have to talk to your attorney about exactly what that means. But those open space dedications are ones that you should really take a good look at.
Okay, thank you. Also, I may have misheard you, but I just want to get clarification. When you were doing the overview of the history of our open space plans, I think you spoke about 2020, and that was the only one that you seemed to think that you weren't so keen on. And can you kind of expound further about why that was?
Yeah, because it wasn't a plan. It was a list of what you own, and that's really all it was. So it didn't update anything. It didn't provide any recommendations. It didn't provide any guidance. So in our work, it wasn't really helpful, and it wasn't helpful to the municipality. Your 1997 plan was spot on, and your 2003 was informative.
Okay, thank you. No further questions from me.
Just, I'm going to ask anyone from the Environmental Commission, anything you heard that generates a question? Okay, if not, let's open up to the public for any comments or questions that you may have. Anybody have any comments or questions, please come up to the microphone.
Jenny Derricks. I just had a couple of questions specifically, and they were kind of touched on a number of times when we talked about Brownfield, which Mr. Zepp knows is one of my favorite topics. Can land that we have, apparently in order to rehabilitate the rest of the remaining part of this landfill that is already deemed a brownfield, the state is asking for land to be swapped, from my understanding, from the last conversation I had with Mr. Zepp about this. Is there an impact to Sparta if we take some of the land that's been identified in this plan and swap it, as the state is asking, to the state in order to allow for this closure to happen?
That's way beyond my pay grade.
Okay.
Sorry.
So, because we would be taking out land that we're identifying in this plan as open space and giving it to the state.
It sounds like a diversion process, and if it's a diversion process, yes, you know, that you'd If you're looking to replace land and you own land and it hasn't been restricted yet, then yes, the concept is consistent. But I haven't been involved, and it sounds fairly complicated, so I really don't want to opine on it.
Okay, thank you, that's fair. White Lake, so you talked about doing a deep dive into the various parcels of land, taking your time and looking. White Lake, I have just photographs of the White Lake Beach sign, and this is not really a question, it's just a statement. A sign that showed a dedication of White Lake Beach using funds from the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation. And that sounds like it's something that should be investigated before we do anything. So if Sparta owns land, you said there was identified land that Sparta owns that is surrounded by state land, and the recommendation is to potentially sell the land to the state. But then we're subject to, just as a comment, I'm not asking for a response, up on Sparta Mountain where they cut down 20 acres at a time, or 10 acres at a time twice a year. I think it's now only 10 acres at a time of the forest. So that's something to consider before you decide to do that. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else?
This is my first time out one of these. So Kerry Murphy, 250 West Mountain Road. My idea is for a dog park. It's a big deal. I think it's my own dog, who was 10, got sick a year and a half ago or so, and he had gone to daycares his whole life, and he could no longer go because I was paranoid. So I started going up to Wantage with him, and Wantage is incredible. They have people come from Bergen County. They have people come from Morris County. I'm very close with Stu Baker, who started that one. So I know the land was donated to him, but then they have to pay for, he has to privately pay for fence and maintenance and stuff like that. But it's an incredible community hub there. I mean, people from Sparta go there a lot. But it's just incredible, like the older community, like what goes on there beyond just, I mean, the dogs are all playing, but the people are talking about local issues and, one older person passes away and there's a guy who comes with a pack, it's his job, and he's like, one of my clients will take Ed's dog and stuff like that. And it's really incredible. It's vibrant. I've been going there for years, but I didn't realize exactly what went on there other than just for the dogs, but it's an incredible place for the people that go there all the time. And I just think it's really needed. I know there's a ton of animal lovers. I looked at the thing and saw that I don't know why I didn't get the survey, but I know that there was a lot of people that suggested that. And like, for example, Wantage Dog Park is only, it's 3 acres, and that's incredible. Like, people from all over New Jersey come for this park, and they have water, which is a big deal, and there's a stream there, which is really nice too. But it's all fenced in, but it's people come from all over and talk about where they've come. The Bronx, like, they come from all over to come to this park, and it's just amazing how far they drive and everything like that, and just what goes on there other than just the dogs playing, the interaction between the people and how people help each other, and what comes out of that park it's probably really good, so I just wanted to state that that's my idea.
Yeah, the dog park did come up in the surveys. People did remark that they wanted a dog park. The dog park in Wantage is the largest in the state. It's actually 60 acres. And they fence in different sections for different sized dogs and different need dogs. And the park, I believe the land is publicly owned, but it's privately managed. So it gets to your point about he operates it via private donation. It is a beautiful spot. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ann Lopuck from 32 East Shore Trail. I just had one question. I guess this is more for the town planners and the council, which is Barbara had mentioned maybe transferring properties surrounded by the state and having New Jersey purchase those properties. That could be a source of funding. But I also, I was also thinking, in this plan, are we going to be approaching any property owners, perhaps seeking property owners who might be willing to either deed their property or sell their property to the township in perhaps environmentally sensitive areas, or areas where there's a lot of traffic and we want to reduce the amount of traffic. I just didn't know if that was part of the plan.
So you've spot on. It's an open space and recreation plan, and it's done in order to qualify for state funding to buy land. So yes, if the town does implement the plan, they'll be identifying and reaching out to private landowners to see if they'd be interested in selling their land to the municipality for new parks or open space. And it's good to hear that Sparta will be updating their master plan, and it can be used as one of the layers in the master plan.
Thank you.
Okay, any other public comments or questions?
Was that little girl with somebody?
Yes.
Okay.
She just loved that.
She's seen enough.
Good eye.
No, she left with someone. I didn't know if
Yeah.
she knew the person she was living with.
Hope so.
I don't know that I can answer that. Kathy Ebbingshausen, Scudder's Road. I just had a question about the slide that was presented. The map seems very dialed in to the center of town, so much so that, areas like White Lake are not present, and, the town as a whole is not represented. So I
Right.
wanted to know, in terms of what's on the report, is it holistic, is there a holistic map on the report?
Yes.
Because this one is very dialed in.
Exactly right. So I zoomed in on that map because I was very keen on explaining the different land uses. But yes, the plan, state actually requires it. There's a map that shows the whole town and how it's preserved or used. So yes, if you go on the website and you look at the plan, it's like, I don't know, page 11 or 12.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Can I just ask one quick question? The trail meeting tomorrow night, is that open?
Yes.
And it's here?
Welcome to
That's here?
7 PM here.
Okay.
Big donuts now.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, seeing nobody, I think that brings us to an end. So I just want to take a moment to, once again, thank the Environmental Commission, Barbara, and everyone who participated in putting this together. One last question is, again, when I read it, I wish I had known about this sooner. So for anyone that may be here tonight or listening at home, where can people find the plan that we're talking about now? So if they wanted to look, I'd recommend everybody read this.
The plan's on the website.
On the website, on the
Yes.
town website?
Yes.
On the
Under the
township
environmental-
website?
Okay,
Yep.
great.
No, it's right on the main page,
Fantastic.
under one of the posts.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's a couple down. October 14th is the date it was posted.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we will be having a public hearing, if the board wants to. You'll be scheduling this for this plan element, amendment to the master plan for the December 4th meeting.
Oh, can you talk up a little bit?
You'll
Thank
be
you.
scheduling this plan element. It's an amendment to the master plan. If you were to schedule it tonight, you could possibly schedule it for a public hearing on December 4th at 7 PM at this meeting room. There will be master plan notices of that if you were to schedule it. And then if you, after that hearing, the board moves to adopt it, then it becomes an official element of the township master plan, as you said before, replacing all prior open space plans.
Okay. All right, thank you, everybody. Why don't we take a short break, a 15-minute break? But before we go, I just want to mention, I think you heard a lot about the master plan. Just a quick commercial on the survey. On the ends of the dioceses, there's a QR code link. If anyone here hasn't taken the survey, please capture that code and take the survey. So why don't we say we'll get back together at 8:30, if that's okay? Okay? All right, thank you, everybody. Together, please.
I live in Warren.
That one has a site plan approved from the planning board because it was a modern site plan approval including soil removal.
Long Hill.
Look, I'm just sitting here saying.
Just get stuck on this. Yeah, Golden Dome apparently.
Oh, yeah.
Questionable soil.
Freaky Friday. Yes, yeah.
You gotta, of course you gotta fix it.
Need a gavel.
The other one.
It's like
Okay, thank you, everybody. All right, so that moves us on to the second subject for tonight, which is the PDRM2 zone. We're going to talk about the max building size and required impact statements. So if I can, just a little background. Earlier in the year, the ordinance subcommittee, which included Bill Enright, Jeanette Burke, Ernie Rexat, and myself, and we had guidance from our professionals, met to discuss the PDRM2 zone. The team recommended and the board agreed that we have a discussion on two potential changes to that zone. Those two changes that we're going to talk about tonight is that no building can have a size greater than 175,000 square feet, and that the same impact statements that are required in the economic development zone and the PDRM1 zone are also to be required for the PDRM2 zone. If we make these changes would make the PDRM2 zone consistent with the changes that were made for the economic development zone and the PDRM1 zone back in 2022 under ordinance 22-21. So tonight, I believe everyone should have received a copy, I believe it was posted on the website, a draft copy of an ordinance that shows those changes. And just a couple other points just to get us all kind of level set. So when you look at these zones, look at under ordinance 2221, these zones have already prohibited distribution centers, fulfillment centers, parcel hubs, and trucking terminals within the PDRM2 zone. Another point is rail use is not permitted within the PDRM2 zone. So again, the purpose of this ordinance is to make this more consistent with the two adjacent zones. So with that said, Catherine, if you could you walk us through the changes and any points or discussion that you'd like to bring up?
Sure. Thank you, Ron. So as Chairman Day mentioned, this was something that we had discussed at this board, I don't know if it was last meeting or the meeting before, just initially it was an evaluation and analysis of the zone as it exists to see what the standards looked like and kind of a recap of when the ED and PDRM1 zones were amended, kind of why this one was kind of left out to some extent or didn't include some of the same changes at the same time. And I did provide an overview to the board discussing kind of this is a more unique zone in that it really only permits planned development due to the size of the properties. I talked through some of kind of what the mechanisms are for planned development and how they're a little bit different than a normal site and site plan. And essentially, we landed as a board to look into really some limited changes that would make it more consistent with the ED and PDRM1 zones. And that was the total building size. We talked through some of the numbers, the percentages, the proportions, and what exists in the planned development overall, and talked through some of those prospective numbers, but essentially decided to cap the building sizes regardless of that, just as a measure to make it more consistent again with the other zones nearby. In addition to that building size, we pretty much copied and pasted over all of the design standards that were put in for warehouses, we were actually pretty forward-thinking in that when we put together a lot of the design standards for this type of use, it was prior to the state putting out their warehouse siting guidance, which said these are things you should do. So we did it prior to that. We came up with that beforehand, and I think that they work really well as design standards that help to control and limit intensity, and will help to, as a measure in this zone, to make sure that we have, very strict design standards that help limit a lot of the features that could be otherwise hard to mitigate. And those include things like the ratio of the dock doors, the amount of parking spaces, the limitation on the number of tenants that a building can be kind of chopped up amongst, an overall building can be chopped up in that sense, the landscape area ratios, the design standards for the buildings and the materials, which we have encountered for development applications in the ED zone already and have been enforced. And I think they've done a wonderful job to create architectural standards for buildings that are more industrial in nature. Additionally, we have shared pretty much, again, copy-pasted over the required impact studies for developments in this zone in particular. We do have them across the boards for the general ordinances for major site plans and subdivisions. But these are impact studies related to environmental impact, traffic impact, and then community impact. So they're specifically in this zone to make sure that there are requirements of any development application for uses in this zone. So, like I said, that whole second section and a majority of the changes we made, one, were, again, limited to the scope. This whole analysis was limited to the scope of making it consistent through the features that were adopted previously for the ED and PDRM1 zone, and also were basically a copy-paste over of those changes. So there wasn't any significant difference from what exists today in those other zones. I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has as well.
Can I just add a piece of context for the public? So this does not preclude us of evaluating this zone during the master plan work that's upcoming too. So this is just a near-term amendment to tighten up things. We will certainly be looking at all zones as we do the master plan work. So this is not the be-all, end-all.
Yeah, and I should add that one of the discussion items was basically, or, one of my discussion items was, hey, we're working on a master plan, we can easily capture this. And kind of the sentiment from this board was that we should really look at this before rather than later. These are two zones with big chunk, or one zone with two pretty big parcels, and they don't have the same protective design standards and measures that we have in the other zones. So let's do it now. And I think you're exactly right. That's why the scope is a little bit more limited, but still very, very effective in what the changes will do.
Okay. Okay, Dave, any comments, questions? Tom, either one of you?
Mr. Chairman, the only question I have, it's a little bit off-related from this, but it's something I thought about before. With regards to the various impact studies, I understand that everyone wants that. Just from a standpoint, and this is probably a question for Tom, completeness, those particular studies aren't necessarily listed on the existing checklist. So while I may bring them up in a report, I think it's more of a situation where you want them more up front. So I'm not sure if we have to have a separate ordinance to amend that or how you do that.
Well, we could add that to this ordinance as an amendment to the checklist, but it's pretty straightforward. In other words, there is a checklist. The checklist is adopted by ordinance, and you could add these documents to that checklist, then you have to check it on the application that you submitted it.
That's what I had.
And as a follow-up, I did look at the checklist. Only the environmental impact study is included as a checklist item. So when you're deeming an application complete, before it can get scheduled before the board, there are items that they either have to provide or request a waiver for. So I think Dave is exactly right. I was looking at it myself. We should probably add, and as Tom mentioned, it's something you do by ordinance because the checklist is an ordinance item, that we add the traffic impact study and the community impact study for projects that have to provide it per the ordinance.
Is that part of this that will be added to this?
It can be an addition.
ordinance?
Yeah, I think we can add it.
Not separate.
But
You can add it. You can add it right to this.
Okay.
It's another section, and then it'll have probably an attached checklist or some.
or an additional checklist items to be added to the checklist. We can either attach a checklist or just add those items.
Okay. Brian, you're in this time. Any questions or comments?
I have no further questions.
Celeste?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Jenny?
Okay, I do. As I was reading through the proposed changes, and I know it's a copy-paste, I went back and compared it to the original PDRM2 language. And there are two things that I'd like you to consider. I think one is minor. Vehicular movement and parking control under G1. It says soil removal, storage buildings, warehouses, and distribution center uses shall be accessed through the blah, blah, blah. If distribution centers are not allowed here, I would suggest taking that out of the language.
I will take a look at that and make sure that that's removed. Again, as Chairman Day had mentioned, those were all made prohibited uses. And so if there is any language inconsistency, I'll make sure to clean that up.
Okay.
And it will just be a simple section add to this.
Okay.
To remove that.
One more thing is, under the permitted uses, one of the things that I think should be going in there, and we have the opportunity just to add it, is affordable housing. And the reason I think it's not difficult to add is in number 4, it does talk about if planned development voluntarily provides for affordable housing, the impervious coverage could go up to 77%. So it does reference it there, but yet it is not included in a permitted use.
Joan, that is intentional. This is an industrial or economic development zone, and no housing is allowed in it. So the reference in the incentive provision is, we went over at the last meeting, but it's more of a, let's call it a voluntary incentive that the township council has to agree is an adequate contribution in funds for the township, to the Housing Trust Fund for the township to do something related to affordable housing.
So it's giving money.
It's giving money, and only if the township council, not the planning board recommends, but the township council decides that there is being an adequate contribution to the Housing Trust Fund. And I tried to explain a little bit, but some of the things you can use the Housing Trust Fund, which are creditworthy, even still under A4, are things like donations to a group home for adults with disabilities. And group homes are a very useful way to get credits for affordable housing, because each bedroom of a group home constitutes one unit of credit, still under A4 and under prior code rules. And so that's just an example of how funds to the Housing Trust Fund might be expended with the consent of the governing body to achieve credits. And you can use things like group homes and other alternative housing techniques, including now some new additional ones, for up to 50% of your township's entire, municipal's entire prospective need obligation. So this zone is not a zone for building housing in it, and that would not be a good idea in my view, because it adjoins the railroad and adjoins a recycling plant called a MRF, which is a DEP preempted, I would call heavy industrial site in a sense, that they make quite a bit of noise. Also, the Nicolak factory is adjacent to the properties, so there are other industrial type users. So it's just not a good location for housing, and it's not. It doesn't presently and has never permitted housing as a use in that area.
All right, thank you.
So I have a few questions. The first one is, on page 2, there's a mention of under landscape plan, a minimum landscape area ratio, LAR, of 0.40. Can you just describe a little bit more about the LAR, and is that a percentage of the total land area? And if so, why so low? Or can you just describe that a little bit better?
So look at number 7 before it gets to 7A. There's a kind of a description of what contributes to the LAR. So it's anything that's not part of the building. It has to be landscaped or have ground cover. It's intended to capture green space. And it's supposed to be that anything that's not parking or impervious coverage basically gets to remain as green space. The LAR right now in the ED and PDRM1 zone is 0.4, and that was really backed into based on what the allowances were for the impervious coverage. The impervious coverages here are much lower, so the LAR will naturally probably be higher unless a variance was sought, and then they'd have to seek another variance for impervious coverage. They'd have to seek additional variances for the landscape area ratio. The intention here really is to preserve green space even on more industrial sites, because you, in places that aren't Sparta, you see industrial sites that can get out of hand, become very cold, have a lot of stormwater runoff, not have much green space for environmental and for stormwater management. And so it's a benefit, I think, from aesthetic purpose, from an environmental purpose, from a stormwater management purpose, and it really was I think unique to us looking at the industrial zones and trying to soften them and make sure that there was landscape area. Again, the 0.4 was something that was backed into for the PDRM1 and the ED zone based on the coverages allowed. So maybe it seems a little low here. We were literally just copying over. The analysis was not larger. The scope was not larger than looking into how we could copy these over, really.
But if I heard you correctly, it doesn't really create an exposure here, because for this zone, the maximum impervious surface is magnitude smaller. Like, it's minuscule compared to those other zones, so that this will naturally be much higher than 0.4.
Yes, this is a minimum they have to reach, so likely it will be much higher.
Okay. And the impervious, can you remind us what the impervious coverage maximum allowed is?
Give me 1 second to open up the existing ordinance right now. So it's a little bit different here in this zone. I think we discussed it last time because it's not like a typical site. There's 2 sections to this ordinance. One being that a planned development has allowances, so it's like an overall, the whole big portion of the site has an allowance, and then if you chop up the site and subdivide it into smaller sites, which have to be a minimum of 6 acres apiece, they have their own allowances in there, but the overall coverage is governed by the 3% that's allowed for the overall
Just so
site.
everyone knows, just 3. Yeah.
3% is the coverage allowance.
Okay. Second question, on page 4, it talks about the traffic impact study.
Say that one more time, I'm sorry.
Page 4, traffic impact study, letter C, it talks about the traffic study shall show different standards are met. The second one mentions maximum allowable peak hour trip generation. And it has a rate of 0.25 trips per 1,000 square feet.
Correct.
If we look at the maximum building size, the smaller max that this would limit to, that's still 44 trips per hour.
So this was a kind of, it was, again, a unique standard that was placed in the ED and PDRM1 zone. I remember explaining this a lot, and I'm going to do my best to explain it again this time. Because when the ordinance was changed for that zone and what even was changed here to prohibit certain uses and to basically, as you know, warehouses aren't a single format any longer. They're not all just storage facilities. There are distribution centers, fulfillment centers, which all fall under that umbrella, which our ordinance intended to capture, one with definitions and then prohibition of those certain uses that may have higher impacts, whether it be traffic or size or truck traffic, et cetera. And so in order to single out the warehouse use, there are certain trip generations that are identified by the ITE in particular that help characterize those different kinds of uses. So distribution centers, fulfillment centers, cross-dock warehouses all have significantly higher ITE trip generations per square footage. And the ITE bases them basically off square footage when you look at their data. Where warehouses fall in, the category that they fall in is approximately like maybe the 0.22 to 0.26 or 0.27 is what the data shows per 1,000 square feet. And so this was more a, it wasn't meant to create a traffic study kind of standard, like a bulk standard, but it was rather to match and to verify that the traffic study that they were producing, the data matched the use. So it wasn't like a disguised distribution center. It wasn't something that they could provide a traffic study and basically lie about the use, essentially. So it was to verify that it was a true dwell warehouse based on ITE numbers that they would have to testify to under oath, and then basically their data would have to follow up to that traffic study. If it was significantly different post-build, there would be a huge red flag. And so it was really a verification data within the traffic study that you have to show that, and you have to verify that against your use.
Okay, okay. And those higher uses that you referenced earlier on, those are prohibited anyway in here, right? That's what
They
you
are
just talked about
prohibited.
earlier,
And if
right?
your traffic
Yeah.
study did show something like a 1 trip per 1,000 square feet, you would clearly not be a warehouse, right? So you'd have to have a lot of explaining to do about your traffic study.
Okay.
Can I elaborate real quick? And sorry for cutting you off. On the 3% impervious coverage taken in consideration, it's the whole zone. Last time we did go over that, if part of that zone is subdivided and donated back to Sparta, the impervious coverage, allowable impervious coverage goes up to?
So there are incentives included in the zone. So the base impervious coverage allowed is 3%. Anything in addition to that, and why I didn't bring it up, and I apologize that I wasn't clear, the 5% is something that is not a basis, it's not as of right. It's an incentive based on if the township does accept that land. So the township has no obligation to accept it to provide the incentive. The leverage is entirely in the hands of the township to accept that land or not. So it's not necessarily a given that they'd get the 5%. But there still is an open space requirement regardless of whether or not the township accepts it. So they still have to provide the open space. It's just that if the township accepted that dedication, they'd get a 2% incentive on their coverage.
Okay.
Right, and Brian, this is the one where at the end of Houses Corner Road and West Mountain Road, an 88-acre parcel was dedicated to permanent open space by a conservation easement to the Township of Sparta in conjunction with the Golden Dome site plan application. So, and that's already been dedicated, it's deed recorded, and was actually part of the mapping that Barbara is working on, so.
Okay. All right, Catherine, 2 more quick ones. These are just confirmations. Can you confirm that this does not alter the existing requirements for the impervious coverage limits or the minimum lot size if subdivided and the open space set-asides, correct?
No, it does not alter any of that. If anything, it puts a hard cap with the 175,000 square feet if there was in any scenario an opportunity for it to go higher than that. And we looked at some of the numbers. So even if there was an incentive sought and accepted, technically this building coverage cap stops any of the incentives from being realized.
Okay, okay. And the proposed, the new maximum building size applies even if an existing incentive is sought, right? It's going to be
Correct.
utilized. This doesn't change that. It's still capped at, okay.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
I have no questions?
No questions.
Yeah, I just would like to clarify where the PDRM2 is. Is that the property that's near Lake Grinnell, where there are homes in that area? So it's right up against that Lake Grinnell,
Correct.
the back part of it, and then the other part goes out to where the Houses Road
Correct.
property
It goes
is.
about halfway down Houses Corner Road from Lafayette to West Mountain. So it's the upper portion, basically, along Lake Grinnell up there.
Okay, and I just was looking here at page 2, under number 7, landscape area ratio also, and I was wondering if we might want to change that first paragraph a little bit. It reads, "All areas of the site not occupied by a building and required improvement shall be landscaped by the planting of shrubs and trees or the preservation of existing ground cover, shrubs and trees in accordance with landscaping planting plan approved by the approving board. But shouldn't we really put in there after the preservation, shouldn't we put in there non-invasive and native existing ground cover, shrubs and trees in accordance with landscaping planting plan approved by the approving board?
So I agree. The standards below it actually prescribe, so when you look at A landscaping plan shall include the following standards. There's a number of things that landscape plan that's referenced there has to include, which include evergreen plantings for screening, evergreen plantings at offset rows at the property borders, visual screen and aesthetic setting consistent with the character of surrounding area, break up long buildings, screen off parking, service utility areas, provide a variety of species to protect against disease attacking all plantings, shall be selected with consideration for various seasons, mix of colors, textures, shapes, blossoms, foliage, deer-resistant, non-invasive native species.
Yeah, that's what I don't like. Because it says, a variety shall be selected with consideration. Consideration, that word, okay, for various seasons and of different colors, textures, shapes, blossoms, and foliage. Now you're considering deer-resistant, and you're just considering non-invasive and native species.
So this board is the approving body that can approve that plan and can reject anything that doesn't meet those standards.
Yeah, because in the EC, what we're doing is we're trying to develop an ordinance that would, not require, but strongly suggest, native plants or non-invasive plants. So why not put something like that to encourage that with the PDRM2?
I think, it's my opinion
taking
that it does
consider-
already, that it basically says that those should be included, and this board has all the authority to reject that landscape plan or accept the landscape plan. So in my opinion, I think that the board has the authority to essentially dictate to whoever the applicant is, that the landscape plan is either satisfactory based on the ordinance or not satisfactory based on the ordinance.
But wouldn't it be clearer, and wouldn't you save a step if you just put that wording, change that wording? For the applicant. You're not going to consider, you're going to, do non-invasives, or you're going to do natives. So we don't have to have that dialogue during an application.
I'll leave it to the board if they want to decide that. I have no problem with it. I thought it was clear, but if it's not, then I absolutely will take that suggestion.
Just a suggestion, yeah.
Again, what we're trying to do is keep this similar, identical to what we have in the other two zones.
Okay.
And there's also, I think, there's going to be further opportunity as we bring all this stuff back to the master plan and look at how we're going to redefine things there as well.
I'm also not reading it the same way, Christine, you are. I'm reading it as considering for various seasons, comma, then all the other things, which says non-invasive and the consideration part, I think, applies to the various seasons in different colors.
Oh, I think it means that you're considering whether or not you're going to put in deer-resistant plants, or you're going to put in, native or non-native.
Well, I think the fact that
Just be-
both of us are interpreting it differently could be a problem.
Yeah.
Could be as simple as adding right before the non-invasive and native species, just put and shall include non-invasive and native species.
I was thinking maybe to clarify, especially because Bill just brought up his own interpretation, and that's what ordinances are for, you can interpret them. But a way to kind of avoid that consideration word is that a variety shall be selected with consideration for the seasons, colors, that's all subjective, right? As well as a requirement for deer-resistant, non-invasive native species. So we'll put the word a requirement for.
Thank you. Thanks, Ernie.
I'm good, I'll pass it to her.
All right. I had one, again, I guess it's more along the same lines of just kind of taking confusion out. On page 3, under design standards, number 3, it says exposed metal building, sheet or corrugated metal, asbestos, and similar materials used on exterior walls on the front of the building is prohibited. But when you go down to the bottom, number 5, it said building facade should be constructed of the same material and quality on all 4 sides. Aren't they, does that mean it?
I suppose that you are correct. We did have an instance of this actually come up, and I will give that as an anecdote of what I think the outcome of it was good. Initially, it was the Brandstone, it was the Behringer building in the ED zone on Aaron Way, and they had they have a corner lot, so they have frontage on 2 portions. So they had a very nice facade along Aaron Way, I think, and then Park Lake, I think, had the corrugated, or they had exposed metal, which is typical for industrial. They mentioned that it would be a lot more expensive, but they still went ahead with it. They revised their plans, they made the frontage, they had updated, their architect did a wonderful job, and the back of the building continued to have exposed metal. I do think that the reading of this, upon looking at it, it might seem contradictory, but I hope with the outcome I just gave you from the Behringer building makes you realize that I think that the architectural design meets the intent and purpose of the zoning ordinance in that we softened the front of the building, we made it a beautiful product, and I think we worked with the applicant to get to that point, but we didn't overburden by making them do concrete panels on the back. So the back of the building still had that exposed metal to the same color, so it met the same color, different materials, but met with the full design. So maybe it needs to be that it's complementary, or not constructed of the same material, but complementary on all 4 sides, so that you don't have like gray exposed metal on the back and you have tan concrete panels on the front. So, because we do want to, it was a significant, I thought, consideration, and it was a good point that the applicant brought up of cost. Something we should consider as we have applicants come in is that we need to kind of marry that and negotiate that we're not just going to approve any building, but we should be aware of that business owners in town are making an investment and what that cost looks like in today's world.
I would add too, if it's not contradictory, it gives us flexibility during a hearing to make sure that the needs are met in the way we see them fit in that example that you gave.
Mm-hmm.
I bring up one more thing, please. And this is not to change anything here, but it's, when you do the trip generation studies and you're talking about AM and PM, I know that's the standard that we always use, but when you're looking at the master plan, is there a way to consider peak hours really being, I think the worst by Houses Corner and 15 is like the 3:30 time. All the school buses are going down there. Every parent is going down there picking up their kids. And that's one of the worst times. And if it's possible to require in the future that those kind of things also be looked at as a peak hour.
So Dave can correct me if I'm wrong, because I think he's more of an expert in traffic studies than I am, but I believe that the PM hour isn't fixed. The PM peak doesn't have to be fixed at like 6 o'clock. I've seen peak hours be 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
A lot of times, it's a good point, and a lot of times when they do manual traffic counts in a traffic study, those manual counts will go so many hours before and after what the traditional peak hour is, be it in the morning or the evening. And sometimes because of unique circumstances at a particular intersection, it'll hone in on 3:30 to 4:30 or 2:30 to 3:30, whatever it might be. They usually sum up the counts in 15-minute increments so they can hone in on that when they do the traffic study.
All right, so we would have to incorporate that somehow in the future so that they look at it. We don't want to come back after the fact and say, well, we wish you had looked at this.
Yeah, normally, when they, for the future, yes.
Yeah.
When they do a traffic study, they'll try and get a buffer on each side for their own use, especially if they're trying to coordinate with timing of traffic intersections or come up with some left turn lane and what the queuing might be, so they know how long to make a left turn lane, that type of thing. So your point's well taken.
Right, but I don't want to leave it up to them. For instance, when the apartment complex was before us, they did their traffic study and they had their time zones, and it did not include any time that the school buses or kids were around.
Understood.
So,
I agree.
okay.
So Joan, if I understand, so you recommended that that be addressed as part of a master plan?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, because it's going to affect more than just this. I don't want to hold this up. So I would say, like, if you're ready to make the motion with just the couple of changes that were discussed about required and taking out the distribution centers.
I don't know if we got to the end yet.
No, no.
Oh, I thought we did.
We have to go to the public as well.
That was a Chris, I think, yeah.
Ernie, yes.
Ernie, any other questions?
Nope, that's it.
All right, so with that, let's open up to the public for any comments or questions that anybody has relative to this proposed ordinance.
Jenny Derrick, Stefan to Sparta. Page 5, number 4, community impact statement. I think I had this discussion when we were talking about the ED zone. What is the implication of this if you're asking for things that seem very subjective, and then you're also asking for the applicant to decide, for example, in number 2, facilities impact, when you're talking about a review of whether or not, say there's enough, the fire department or the police department or the ambulance squad is close enough, and it may be rhetorical because it may not be important to this location, but just why are we asking for an estimated cost of additional facilities, and who, in the opinion of the applicant, should pay for them? Like, that just seems ridiculous. Sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but that, why bother having these? And I have a bigger opinion about the whole community impact statement section when it really is it doesn't inform whether or not you can reject or approve an application. It seems like you're just asking for information for the sake of asking it, and it's quite subjective. I don't understand the purpose of it. And then I have one other question. Does this zone require a new business, even if it's the same, to be reapproved? So when the Golden Dome is no longer the owner and it's VD, or the gentleman's name is VD, did they come before the planning board and get an approval? I don't remember that happening. Thank you.
So two questions. So the first one kind of goes back to what we talked to when we did 2221. The more data we can get from them, and we're asking for this data, and they have to give it to us, that's going to give us, as well as like the fire department or other people that review these applications, more data to look at. So we can ask more questions and dive into it further, as opposed to not asking. Now it's a requirement. Okay, so it's a little more data than we're getting now, and it helps us again to determine, is it really what you say it is. In terms of the second question, I thought I saw something in here that required new tenants to come before the board. Let me see if I can find that.
It's either new use or change in use. That's the existing ordinance, requires
Right.
prior to the issuance of a CO.
Okay.
Each new use or change in use in the PDRM2 shall be required to receive use approval from the planning board to ensure compliance with the provisions of this section and site plans ordinance standards.
Okay, well, then I just have a follow-up then, because there is a whole section of fees, permit fees per certain square footage, cubic foot of materials. This is in the existing. It's way down in the bottom. It's a fee structure about the tonnage or cubic feet of material brought out, and there's a 5-year a 5-year schedule, and then you can reapply if you don't achieve your goal within the 5 years. And so how does that work if you don't address the fact that there may be a new owner? Unless I'm reading it wrong.
Where are you reading from, Jenny?
So this is the existing ordinance, which doesn't seem to
Oh, the
be
existing,
touched. Doesn't seem to be touched, but that goes to my question about whether or not a new owner, you're saying it's just a change of use.
And just for full disclosure, as we mentioned before, the scope of this analysis of the zone did not go that far.
Okay,
We
that's
really,
fair.
we really looked at how we could help make this more protected as the other zones are with higher quality design standards and impact study requirements.
Okay. Because the ED zone requires a reapproval, doesn't it? And you're talking about consistency, that's why I was just asking.
So the ED zone does, and this
Right.
already had that provision in there about the change in use. But we weren't looking at full consistency across the ordinances. They're very different in many different ways. We were looking at consistency specifically for larger industrial uses like warehouses that would have those design standards and traffic impact studies in there. So it was really, it was, like I said, limited in scope at how we looked at this.
Okay, thank you.
Rick Finkel, 13 Hayward Road. Two questions. One is, I understand the need for consistency between PDRM 1 and PDRM 2 or ED, whatever. What are the as we bring them closer together, what are the differences between the two PDRM zones? Is there still significant differences, or are they one and the same?
The biggest difference between the PDRM2 zone and any other zone in town, including PDRM1 or ED zone, despite having very similar names, is that the PDRM2 zone requires what's called plan development. So every single permitted use listed in that zone is required to be done under basically a larger plan. So you can't just subdivide the site and develop a portion of the site. You have to have a large plan for the site. It's an MLUL term or municipal land use law term, and that larger sites basically have to be a plan development or plan economic development, and include a lot more detail than a normal just site plan would. So that's the biggest difference, I'd say, in that just even the procedure is much different than the others. In the past, when the PDRM 1 and ED zone were amended, this was also included with an amendment because there were some shared uses, even within that plan development structure, for warehouses that weren't specific to warehouses as we know them today. It was from the past, kind of just generally warehouses. And so that was updated when the ED and PDRM 1 zones were updated to remove distribution centers, fulfillment centers, trucking terminals, all those uses, and basically match them up. But from a standpoint of trying to compare them, it's very difficult just because the PDRM2 contemplates this larger plan development and caps coverage across the entire development rather than how a normal site within a zone would be looked at.
Okay, thank you. Ron, did you say it restricts rail use? Was that one of the?
It's not a permitted use.
It's not a permitted use. And where does the PDRM2 zone start if I was to go down Houses Corner Road from Route 15?
I'd have to have a map in front of me to really show you.
And that's why I asked the question. I don't have the map, but
They're
I see a
adjacent to
lot
each other.
of land getting removed and it getting leveled right along the railroad track. So if that's in PDRM2 and you're trying to restrict rail use, I don't understand, because it seems the whole plan, and I have no official knowledge, but they're leveling that out for future use along the railway.
Well, let me make sure I'm saying it right, and I'm going to look to Tom and Catherine for help on this. So I know when we look at the economic development zone and we look at PDRM 1, there were some rail incentives.
What you're thinking of, Ron, is ED zone and PDRM1 zone only have rail-dependent use or rail-adjacent use now authorizations. The PDRM2 zone, which basically starts, I believe, just past Nicolak's factory and driveway. I could be wrong. It could start just past the Murph property line, so, but it's generally speaking past Nicolak and maybe past the MRF, if you're familiar with that. It's a municipal recycling facility for construction materials. It's a pretty big building, and they are right on the railroad. They do have some sort of rail connectivity, but the next properties, actually, if you remember the old name, Cosdebas, the Cosdebas Sand and Gravel operation operated for 80 years in the valley near the railroad. It was already graded down and had significant soil removal for those 80 years. That is in the PDRM2 zone, as is the next property, Golden Dome, where there is some.
Past Nicolak,
Past
heading
Nicolak.
towards West Mountain.
Right, they do
Right?
not allow rail-adjacent uses. They do not have those benefits. I would have added to what Catherine said, is that the PDRM2 is very significant in that it has a maximum of 3% cover, 3% impervious coverage. That's very restrictive. And the 88 acres, as Brian asked about, was already dedicated to open space, and that is the land between Lake Grinnell and Houses Corner Road, and that is preserved in privately restricted, but to the benefit of the Township of Sparta, open space. That's 88 acres of private but deed restricted to Sparta open space. The property I think you're thinking of that you see from Route 15 is probably the Michelati, the former Michelati property, now owned by Mr. Shoemaker, and is the site of a previous use variance by the zoning board in the 1970s to have soil removal between the railroad and Houses Corner Road. And that is in the PDRM1 zone.
Okay.
Okay.
And they do have rail use.
They could have it. I don't know that they use it, but, and I think you should realize that when you're adjacent to a rail, someone can use it, and the township is not in control of whether someone can use the railroad. There might be standards of what uses and what restrictions are on those uses, like the PDRM1 zone and the PED zone. But people who will join railroads, people who will join roads, have the ability from federal law to use the railroads.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the public?
How do they get there?
Okay.
Oh, they're not like full.
So if the board would entertain it, you would be making a motion to recommend this draft ordinance with the revisions you discussed tonight that I'm sure Catherine has noted, and we'll incorporate it as our scrivener, and I'll help her, to the Township Council for possible introduction by the Township Council. Then it would still come back to you for a consistency review report for consistency with the master plan, and if it was then after public hearing decided to be adopted by the governing body, it would become an ordinance. It's basically a surgical ordinance of the PDRM2 zone to incorporate the restrictions that were used in the prior zones, those other two zones.
So I'd like to make that motion.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second. Do we need to go through the
No.
amendments?
I think she got it.
I got them, yeah.
They're pretty straightforward. They're very straightforward.
Okay, could we get a roll call, please?
Sure. Deputy Mayor Dean Blumetti,
Yes.
Jeanette Burke,
Yes.
Christine Dunbar,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Bill Enright,
Yes.
Joan Furman,
Yes.
Justin Canales,
Yes.
Celeste Luciano,
Yes.
Ernie Rackstad,
Yes.
Mike Sylvester, Brian Zimmerman,
Yes.
Chairman Rondé.
Yes. All right, the motion is passed. Thank you. Okay, so that then brings us to the third item of other new business, which is the new ordinance on cannabis. So, Mr. Collins, could you kind of give us an update on where we are with this?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. We're fortunate to have the council here with us, and they can help us understand the direction they'd like us to go in. But my understanding is, although the ordinance was introduced by the governing body at its October 22nd meeting, which, when it was introduced, it means has to be referred to the planning board for 35 days for review for what's called a consistency or referral report. But the governing body in their dialogue introduced it with some blanks and would like to have you have dialogue with them about what zones, if any, to allow some or all of these uses in. And technically, that ordinance as introduced probably couldn't even be adopted because it has blanks that they knew about that they left in so that you could talk about at this board level and with them the uses that might be allowed for the different cannabis licenses and in what zones might they be allowed, if any. And to add to that further, it's a little hard to understand because you don't get involved in the taxation or the licensing aspects of cannabis. There are two other ordinances in addition to this, the third ordinance, which you do get involved in for consistency review. But cannabis is unique in that it's been authorized by both the state constitution and by state legislature, and it sets up a protocol where a party that wants to undertake the activities, the regulated activities, under any of the 6 licenses has to get a license from the state of New Jersey and a license from the governing body. So there's a governing body ordinance to establish this licensing process, and I'm not directly involved in that. Luckily, Ursula Leo is here, and she works with Tom Ryan. But my understanding is it proposes 2 licenses for retail and 1 for the other categories of potential cannabis. So it's kind of like that's a regulatory system that exists separate from zoning, and this is one of the few uses. It's a little bit like alcohol license, but that's even different. Basically, it's a use that you can only, even if it's allowed in a zone, you can only have that use if you have the license from the governing body and the state of New Jersey. And then there's a third ordinance that taxes each stage of the of the entire economic process of cultivation through sale of cannabis, and that taxation, some of it goes to the state of New Jersey and some of it can go to a municipality that is the host municipality of the use. It's a lot of information, but I think what my understanding is it's probably not going to be adopted in this form. Dean maybe or the mayor can tell us the ideas that are being considered, and so maybe we can narrow our focus of what the council would like the board to opine about or give ideas about or give recommendations about for perhaps what zones for, I think, primarily commercial. But
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Tom. So as you mentioned, a formal vote on master plan consistency really isn't necessary at this point. The ordinance will be revised. So what the council is really seeking tonight is general feedback on recommended zones, and we really want to just start with retail. Let's keep a focus for now on retail. If we were going to recraft the ordinance for retail, what would be some of the recommended zones? We could, and I think I asked Catherine maybe to kick us off, but we could start with all the zones today where we have other types of retail, and then maybe evaluate that and narrow it down. But I think at the end of this discussion, we'd just like to have recommendations back to the council on if we're going to look at retail, what would be the appropriate zones, so that if it should pass an introduction again at some point and comes back for master plan consistency review, that it would be aligned. It would not be a shock at that point. So I think that's just a general feel for what we'd like to get through at this point.
And I did have an opportunity to look, I didn't do any mapping or formal analysis, but I did look through and did a cursory review of, based upon the ordinance provision and of essentially the distance this must be from certain other uses, what it should be or could be adjacent to also beyond the ordinance of what's appropriate essentially. I was able to kind of whittle it down to a few zones that I thought could be up for consideration. None of for the way that development patterns are in the town center zones, it's not viable. So it's just not, it's not a place, even though there are existing retail in that area. It's just not really viable based on the distance to other facilities that would exclude it anyway. So it's not appropriate really in the town center zones. In more open areas that are currently pretty, or there's not much development, or there's an openness for development in the PCED zone along Route 15 across from North Village, has an opportunity to maybe include a retail use for it. And then the C1 and C2 zones, they did have some adjacent neighbors that were residential in character, or maybe a mix of like daycare or recreation uses that it may conflict with, but there are properties that have opportunities. So it wouldn't probably be appropriate for the entire zone, meaning that, not every property could qualify essentially for a use like this because it's adjacent to some other kind of use. But there are properties that probably could be appropriate for it when looked at.
Catherine, can you jump back? Thank you for doing that homework. The first comment you made about the town center zones not being appropriate, can you expand upon that? I know we're talking multiple zones that make up the town center area. And
Yeah, there's a number of, there's a mix of residential, which I tried to be very cognizant of. So residential uses that are all over, or right adjacent back up to it, to some of the town center zones. There are also a number of churches, parks, and daycare uses, playgrounds. I don't mean just churches, there are other religious uses too, of which this use would require a 500-foot buffer from. So I think that just based on the development is much tighter in the town center. It's much more, it's the denser retail development in the entire township. And I looked at it and didn't think, as I scanned through the properties, seeing, a park here or school here or residence here, or there are some places that may have an apartment over a store or something. And I was just trying to be very sensitive to that, I guess. It could, again, I did like a windshield survey of properties and zoning and existing kind of aerials and things like that. I did not go super in depth, so we could definitely take another look. Basically, if something looked like it wasn't a good place to put it, like initially, there's a lot of parks, there's a lot of schools, there's this, it was just like exclude it at this base level right now. Let's look at what is actually kind of viable at this first look to have something for this evening's meeting.
Catherine, I had done something similar. I initially included PCD North Village, but I guess because of the parks and residential, that's what knocks it out of there, it sounds like.
Yeah, because there's the assisted living right there, there's residential at the back, and I think there's also a provision about, like, it can't be on the same premises as food, as eateries and stuff, I think the ordinance included.
Okay.
And so I wasn't sure about, like, ownership of parcels in North Village, how separate they were. So if there is a shopping complex, like a retail strip mall, or there's restaurants adjacent in other tenant suites, technically, I don't think it would be allowed. That's just my reading of the ordinance.
I can ask a question on the adjacency to the food stores. My understanding could be wrong, but I think as the way I understand it, that the intent of the restriction is to eliminate a pass-through with a food store, so that you wouldn't be able to shop at a dispensary that somebody dispenses cannabis and then get food in the same location. And that if there was no pass-through, that they could coexist in the same strip mall, I suppose. But
Okay, I read premises as like not being allowed in the same area, so maybe we just clarify that
I could
in
be
the
wrong,
next
but,
run.
that's-
No, you may exactly be right, and I was just reading it more conservatively.
yeah, okay.
I think it's pretty specific, and I don't understand why this is, but a cannabis retailer should not be located in the same premises as a grocery store, delicatessen, indoor food market, or other store that engages in either the retail sale or food in the licensed retail sale of alcohol beverages.
Because I don't want you to linger there, right? You go in there and go out. There's no loitering. There's very strict limits on how many wait time you can. So I guess having food right there encourages loitering, and I think that was the intention. But
Okay.
I guess I could be wrong.
But the premises.
Should we have like a loitering
Premises
standard
would
instead?
capture a whole shopping center, so.
I thought so, because it says
So-
in or upon the same premises, so I was a little bit, like I said, more conservative about how I approached appropriate zones, simply because I didn't want to impede or conflict against what was in the ordinance as drafted.
Can you enumerate the zones that you mentioned before again, that you thought were applicable?
Sure. So again, first glance, we can do a deeper dive into this and understand better, like how many properties are, or how viable it is based on a deeper analysis. But the PCED zone, the C1 and the C2 zones.
Maybe it helps to try to talk about where the C1s are, Catherine.
Give me 1 second.
I see what you're saying, though this paragraph about location has a lot of setback requirements, I guess conditional use distances.
Give me 1 second.
Yes, they're conditional use distances, so they would have to be met, and if they weren't met, they'd need a use variance from the Board of Adjustment. So the way it's, which is a very effective way to sort of limit the locations. Some of those standards can sometimes be a little vague, but this is not vague, and so basically, you would have to be 500 feet from door to door from a school, or a state licensed daycare, or the daycare facility, or the park, or the playground, or the place of worship. So she's probably right, the town center has multiple churches, multiple daycares, multiple quasi-schools, and so and then you also have to be 400 feet from the nearest residence. So it's pretty common to have a resident within 400 feet of the town center zone, because it's sort of a linear zone running from the Stop and Shop to the bowling alley along the frontage of those roads. So that could be, you might have to change this standard, this conditional use standard or condition to, if you would like it to be in the town center zone. The C1 zones, there are numerous C1 zones throughout the town. Some of them are along Woodport Road coming from the town center, from the bowling alley up to, Mohawk Gardens, formerly Mohawk Gardens, whatever it is now, and the First Hope Bank and those kinds of buildings. They also have the Lutheran Church. They definitely have residences behind and within 400 feet, so that condition probably couldn't be met by anybody, at least on the right-hand side of Woodport Road as you go up. I'm not sure the C2 allows retail, so I'd have to check that. That might just be offices. Another C1 location is the Upper Lake Plaza, but that's within, I think it's within 500 feet of the Our Lady of the Lake Church and the Reverend Brown School. There's a little more C1 going down Sparta Avenue towards Newton. Same issue, though, about the school. Then there's a C1 over by Route 15 by the bagel, what's the name of the great bagel station? There is a C1 right there. It's small. And that might not have a church or a residence within 500 feet.
That little guy, yeah.
But it has a food place.
It does have a food place, and I don't think they're technically on the same lot. They might be, but I know they share the same driveway. And so that you would want to make it clear that premises could be, just means the same, I think you mean the same building is what I think it's really meaning the same building, right? You wouldn't have it in a grocery store. You wouldn't have it in a liquor store. You wouldn't have it in a, yeah. So that, we could work with that language.
But it's 500 feet property line to property line for the retail. It's 500 feet building to building for the manufacturer and cultivation. So there's a difference there. That 500 feet property to property line, even that location wouldn't work.
Right.
There's a residence within 500 feet on the other side of the tracks and across the street.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be done on this.
Corners of each building, on the residence, it's corners of each building. So, well, is there a residence? I
That's
don't.
on cultivation.
Okay. No, on cultivation, that's different. But I think we're pretty much concluding that we're going to focus on retail only, and that helps us narrow the scope, really does, because it also helps us narrow the zones if you try to stay in the retail zones. And so, where else? There might be a C1. Dave, can you remember? There's some C1. There's a C1H on Route 94 up by Monroe Schoolhouse. But there's a school. There's a school with old Downing's Furnace, but there's a school within 500 feet. I don't think you're thinking of that area. So you can narrow the problem with you have to pick a zone, and then you pretty much with retail. You could be consistent with the master plan as long as the retail is in a zone that allows the sale of other goods. So consistency with the current master plan will work, generally speaking, in any retail zone, but then the standards would be what might make it hard for an applicant to meet. The other very fascinating thing about cannabis is that the council has control by that other ordinance of who gets the license. And if it's limited to one or two, that makes it easier to envision, how many they're going to be and where they're going to be. Now, that could be changed by a new ordinance of the council to add licenses to it, and that might mean more than two. But it's a three ordinance system is the point to know, and you're involved in the land use.
And just for clarification, that distance restriction, I think that's on the structure, right, not on the lot line.
That's the way I read the one about retail. But he was talking, I think, about cultivation.
Retail's on lot line.
Retail is on the lot
Line.
Says that in the ordinance?
It's in the ordinance. The cultivation
No, we're just talking
and
about
the other ones
retail.
are building the building.
Right, I think
At
it's
least
just on the
400
structure.
feet from the nearest dwelling.
Yeah, 400 feet from the nearest dwelling located on a neighboring lot, which distance shall be measured from the corners of each building that are
structure,
closest to each other. That's in the retail.
Yeah.
But it's not one of the things that might be possible, these are just general standards that have been developed by Ursula and other towns maybe with how to try to have conditions about where could such a retail facility go. You don't need these particular conditions, and you can also do something, I'm not saying you should, but you don't have to have everything be a condition of a conditional use. You can have another section on regulatory standards for cannabis that aren't necessarily conditions to a conditional use, but it gets a little complicated, and it's easier to focus on this ordinance draft for now.
Are there any lot line or dwelling property building restrictions for liquor stores? Or schools
You're
or places of
getting me.
worship?
I think there is something from the state code. It doesn't come from zoning, but I could be wrong, and I believe there's something about distance to a school or something like that for liquor licenses. But that's ABC regulations, not regulatory, not usually land use ordinances.
Where did I see that?
Do we have any sense of where we would like to allow one or two? I mean, it might be good to help us focus our attention on,
Could you put one in the economic development zone as a conditional use?
No retail.
It says accessory retail sales. I don't know what the word accessory means in there, but.
Yeah, in the zone, in the ED zone, good question, Joan. There is an allowance for someone who is using their building to make something, to sell some of,
Cultivate it and make it.
some of their things, right? But the concept, I think we're focused now solely on retail, and that there is no allowance in the ED zone to just have a retail store. Okay, that is not a permitted use in the zone, independent of you having your place where you make the products that you're trying to sell in your 25% square footage of the building for retail. So ED zone's not really a retail zone. PDRM 1 and 2 are not really retail zones. PCED does allow retail, but I'm not sure there was any problem with that zone for these setbacks. That's the property across the street from North Village. I don't think there's any houses. I don't think there's a school or church. There's residences across the street, but even the assisted living must be at least 300 feet or 400 or 500 feet from some parts of the PCED zone.
What might be helpful is, again, this was just kind of like done cursory, is that to get a better idea, so like the C1 zone permits retail, is scattered around. There's probably going to be portions of the C1 zone where it's just knocked out based on the way the ordinance is written. But what I could do is put together a map basically of the structures and then do a 400 or 500 foot buffer from them to show what properties would be viable. You know, or how I read it, which might just need clarification about being on the same premises as other food consumption places, that's subject to change. So there could be a multi-tenant strip mall right now that doesn't have any food places, but like allows for food. So there could be or there could be, let's say there's a Chinese food place and that's the only restaurant, it could leave and then become this, and then it would be allowed. So there is like some things you could think through, but then that would exclude future tenants from being restaurant, right?
I think the council's really thinking, though, it will not be in the same premise, same part of the building as the cannabis.
Yeah, so we probably just need to clarify that.
You won't have
but-
both food and,
And just to clarify, I don't believe that's something that the council is introducing. I think that's a state regulation, that they can't be co-located in the same zone that you can, in the same
Good point,
structure
good
Okay.
point.
that you can't, but they can be adjacent to each other.
Yeah, we just want to make sure that the ordinance is clear for the future users of it. But what I can do from a basic level of looking at the zones is do that buffer analysis to basically understand where residences are and where those kind of uses, the sensitive uses like churches and parks and everything we don't want it to be or can't be near, we can see that on a map. So even though the C1 zone, which I think is probably a viable candidate for this, it allows retail again, it's scattered, there's other opportunities for it. There are places where it's not directly adjacent to residential, or it does have some like buffer. So I can do a quick map analysis of that. And then also the PCED zone, which I think we've all kind of thought about in our head as a good option, but I just want to make sure on paper that it looks that way.
Catherine, one question I have.
There's a
as I was
daycare,
going
by the
through
way, I'm
these.
sorry, there's a daycare in the ED zone that
It's
we just.
behind it, I looked, it's far enough
Yeah,
away.
okay.
But yeah, we just had an application that had that
Right.
daycare, but it's on the other side, it's probably 1,000 feet away, probably from that property.
One question I had going through this and trying to think it out a little bit is, you know, when you look at, we know what our setbacks are for the Sparta Township zones, and for each zone's got its own. But then when I look at the setbacks that the state may have for cannabis, they may be larger than what we have in our zones. So our zone may have a 10-foot setback. The state ordinance for cannabis may say 50-foot. So how do we prevent a conflict there and approving something that could be in conflict?
So these are conditional uses,
Right.
I believe. You can make these
So
bulk
we
standard.
have to
these
go
is-
through that and understand what they are. And put them in
Yes.
the conditions.
Which some of them have been. So if you look at the cannabis cultivator,
Yeah.
there's an access and setback requirement, which I assume is based off, I don't know if it's based off a state regulation or just like.
That's one issue that we wanted to get clarification on, and we'll get it from council, because I think when we initially thought about it, we wanted to put it at the state minimum to start with, because I know we can always do more. We just can't do less than the state. And so I'm not clear yet on whether the setbacks that we put in there are at the state minimum, or are they based on experience in other townships and we put the setbacks? I don't know, Ursula, you're here, so the experience. So the one thing we may do, because I think that will give you more insight into what zones would be appropriate, because, you know, for example, you pointed out as written now under the TCC, it may be too close to a residential, but that's because we put 500 feet when the state minimum is actually 200 feet. And so if you put 200 feet, then that opens up the state minimum. Now, Mr. Day has raised a point, which is, well, that setback that the state provides may be less than what we provide. And so my understanding, would that issue then come up under the conditional use analysis, saying, listen, the state said 200 feet for retail. We, in that zone, require 300 feet. And so, Mr. Applicant or Mrs. Applicant, you're going to need to justify why you get 100 feet less, and that's part of the conditional use analysis, is that right? So even if we could put the zone in that's less than allowable in that zone, the applicant's just going to have to know that when they come before you under an application, that that's something that they're going to have to meet their burden on.
I think from looking at the proposed ordinance, these setbacks would be greater than what's required in the ordinance right now. And these would govern this use as a condition. So if they can't meet that condition, they'd get kicked from a permitted use to a zoning board as a higher threshold of proof and a higher burden of proof to show why they would get that. The state's recommended minimums or their model ordinance has no bearing on our requirements. I think Ron was saying, if our zones have a lesser setback and they can meet that, then how does the higher setback threshold in this ordinance rule? And essentially for conditional use for this particular, it would rule. They would have to meet this.
So we just would have to know what they are and make sure that they're in the conditional use.
If there was any of these uses, because they're both conditional, whether it's cultivator or retail, because they're both conditional, if this ordinance passes, anytime you see a cannabis use, it would be based upon a conditional use. There's no permitted as of right cannabis
Totally
uses. So
agree.
we always be looking at the conditions.
Everything here is conditional.
I have a question. Are retail licenses at the local level? They don't need like an additional state license? Oh, they do. So,
Before they
so
come to
you,
us, they have to have a state, they have to go through the
oh, so they
entire
get a
state
state
process.
first and then they get an approval here. And then do we have an idea of how many licenses we're looking to?
Only 2.
Just 2? Okay, got it.
And one of those licenses is restricted to like a minority or woman or not small business, veteran-owned business, which you have to get certification from the state to be designated as one of those.
Okay. And are they different with, like, if say that we at some point wanted to have cultivators or wholesalers, or they're different or
Yeah, they're
same?
different, and I think, what happened was, I think, council after, consideration, and then, trying to, realizing that, the amount of work that this planning board has, and the amount of work that the municipality has, at this point, it's probably better to
We're gonna
just
limit
bring
it.
back, see how the retail goes, and then if we get interest on manufacturing or wholesale. And also with the distribution part of it, that was really, you don't get a tax on that anyway. And my understanding is a lot of the retail don't even use the distributor anyway, part of it. So it's not necessary for the functioning of their business to use the distributor license, so it's, but anyway, I think that we can always add uses later based on our experience. So I think it was to sort of start slow.
Okay, thank you.
Catherine, are any of the other towns that you plan for have legalized adult-use cannabis?
Yes.
Do you think you can share like an ordinance or two?
I think I have shared some of my input on it, and I can. They're all written a little bit differently. Some do the same, where they restrict the number of licenses townwide, some don't. Some permit them as of right, some make them conditional. I have probably 2 or 3 in a different range of conservative to more wide open that I could, share with this board.
Can I ask a question? Is there like a big demand to have cannabis stores? Are people not wanting to move to Sparta because there's not a cannabis store? What's going, why has this issue come up now?
So just to zoom out a little bit, as we noted before, this ordinance is admittedly incomplete, and it allowed us a vehicle to engage with this board to get your feedback on it, because the day job of this board is, well, the night job of this board is to what gets built where. And so we were entertaining this idea, and we wanted to solicit your feedback, and so this is an avenue for that. So this is a healthy conversation, and I appreciate the board's time. I know the board's very busy with this. And because it's incomplete, this is going to have to come back again. I understand all that, but it's a good way to get a dialogue going. So to answer your question directly, we are, speaking only for myself, we're looking at this as, we have had some inquiries into this since the state regulations came out, and there were a number of businesses that had approached us over the years. But speaking only for myself, this is to me a safety issue, right? That we know that there's legal adult use here, and again, speaking for myself, I just want it to be sold and safely regulated, inspected by us people here in Sparta. And it seemed like the right time to have this conversation.
Christine, you asked about demand. When the legalization of marijuana was originally on the ballot to vote for legalization, wasn't it like 68% of Sparta voted to approve? Yeah, 2/3, something like that. So
So
there's demand.
Our residents are in favor of selling marijuana here.
Yep.
Yeah. Along with the 52 other communities or towns in New Jersey, just going down the list, most of them shore towns. And none of
that have
Even
legalized
right
dispensaries, I
here.
think there's about
Yeah.
140.
Yeah,
Oh, I was just looking it up. Maybe it's out.
yeah, right here in Andover, yep, yep.
Lafayette, I think.
Yep, in Franklin also, yeah.
Okay.
Let me just ask some questions. If you wanted to start slowly and just start with one thing, why not start with like a cultivator or manufacturer as opposed to a retailer?
I agree.
And then, as a follow-up to that question, one of the things
would
I
like- Let me
looked.
just address that a little bit. You know, it sounds easy, but manufacturing of marijuana is fairly complicated. It can be cultivated in a greenhouse. It can even be manufactured in, I'll call them
Large open
railroad
building.
cars, basically, manufacturing facilities that can be bought online for stock manufacturing. They can also be manufactured, cultivated and manufactured in very elaborate buildings with 24/7 water and lighting and power and air control and negative air control and carbon filtration and very effective techniques for odor control. It's not, it's high-tech cultivation in the truest sense, and it's important to have this type of odor control in a very high-level, expensive maintenance manner. So and it can be fairly big in terms of a building and fairly high and have no windows. So this is interesting. To limit to retail means you really are going to be focused on a couple of stores. And they probably, if you look at some of the examples, they're not usually the biggest stores in the world because the product is so expensive and the sale technique is so easy that the demand is there. So by focusing on retail, you are able to sort of narrow down your locations, and that's what's interesting about this conditional use. If you could change this to be not conditions of conditional use, you can make them standards. Standards can be dealt with by the planning board. If you really end up talking about 2 stores, you really are talking a modest amount of change in terms of visual appearance. It might even be almost it's hard to tell that it's anything other than a retail store. So, and you can do things with design control on that. So I think it's good that the council is saying to you, let's focus in on retail, because there's so many issues about manufacturing and location for manufacturing and size that this is a good start, a good way to learn about it, and also focus in on it. You won't have odor control problems in just a retail facility. That's generally.
No, but has there been any study about crime? It's a cash business, and I've read about many places, Colorado, Washington State, when they opened them up, that they had a drastic increase in armed robberies. So I just, I don't know if that's what you're asking us, or if you're just asking us to identify a zone, but I know it would be a concern that I would like to see addressed.
Speaking of Colorado, there actually is a study out there, a recent one. I can probably pull it up if I have it, but it's actually a more helpful one, which is what they did in Colorado. They did a comparison of areas that allowed cannabis retail with other areas of Colorado that did not have it. So it's sort of zone to zone almost, or town to town. And what they found actually was the opposite, was that cannabis retail, areas that had cannabis retail had less crime. And why is that? Well, it's because when you disallow it, you open up the black market. And people steal and do everything to support the black market. Once you have it legalized, crime went down. And I can share that study with the planning board. I'm happy to do so. But I have it in here somewhere because, I think it's somewhat intuitive. People think that, there's going to be more crime. Actually, it's not. And that's sort of the thought process that a lot of the members of the council had, was that, regulating something, you have much more discretion over. If you look at the actual statute, the ordinance, there are a lot of provisions in there that you do not have if you are, say, what we have now in Sparta, which is sort of the CBD, THC, all those provisions that they don't have to comply with a single one of them. They don't have any security protocol. We can put standards like an actual CCTV camera that feeds into the police department, so that the police department has a real-time feed into the dispensary to see if, hey, there's a kid that just walked in with a Sparta High School hoodie on, maybe we should get down there. Now, right now, that same kid can show up to a THC one, and under the gifting ordinance, possibly get, illegal marijuana right now. And so that was a concern that we have, that we just felt this was a safer way to do it, because cannabis is here, it's here in Andover, and why are we ceding to Andover, the regulation of this? I'm sure Andover's doing a fine job in complying with the state law, but I don't know that. I'd rather have that control over it here in Sparta. So that's sort of the rationale.
Just to piggyback off the safety for a second, every item sold at a licensed dispensary is tested by an independent laboratory that is millions of dollars worth of equipment, often run by PhD laboratory technicians, and they test from microbiomes to potency to all the chemical factors in the ingredients. So when Mr. Mayor was talking about the safety regulations around it, it goes just way beyond of what you could presently go out and get to the store now, where you have no idea what's in it.
No, I absolutely agree with that, and that's one type of study, looking at how you were getting it illegally versus getting it from a store. But what I was getting at is, once you have the store there and you have all that cash and the opportunity for armed robbery, that's what I was reading about. I don't know, Ernie, you, I think, had something you were...
It's probably the same as a liquor store. I mean, my issue is really just in the clientele. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of very upstanding people that are coming into the store. There's also a lot that aren't.
Yeah,
upstanding
bringing
people
them
that
in.
Come into our town to go buy. Let them go to Andover, Newton, and Franklin.
So folks, if I can, I think the intent of the discussion tonight was really consistency and location.
Yeah, I know.
We're kind of going off on different tangents. We could be here till 11 o'clock. We like to wrap up here at 10, and we still have a lot of stuff to do. So let me just, and I want to give the public a chance to give their comments as well. So let me suggest that there's anyone on the dais that hasn't spoken, that has any issues that you want to put out, please feel free to do so. Try to keep it concise. And then I'm going to ask for the public, if we can get to the other business and then capture your comments at the end of the meeting, where we do the open to the public comment. I don't know, Tom, is that
You can do that, yeah.
Yeah, I could just, I get it. I want to make sure we get everything done tonight, and we're, again, we're supposed to end up at 10, we're probably going to go to 10:15, 10:20, and don't want to keep either us or the public out here to wrap this up, so. So does anyone in the dais have any pressing questions or comments that you'd want to add that haven't been added? Okay.
Just do we have clear next steps for this? The only question I have.
Yeah, the map was.
Yeah, so Catherine, you're going to take the next step on this?
I am.
Okay.
I'll do an analysis of the retail use as we discussed tonight, mostly in the PCD and the C1 zone. If anything else gets uncovered as part of a deeper dive, I'll bring that back. And I don't know if the board wants to, I know the proposed ordinance included the cultivator.
Just the retail.
Just
Retail.
Oh, okay, just retail, okay.
And
Do
if
you need
could,
further
we talked-
guidance?
I'm sorry?
Okay, Dan.
If you could, if we could maybe model what 500, 400, 300 feet might look like in terms of how much available space that opens up.
I can do that, yeah.
Okay, great.
That was my, can I ask if you
Anybody
need
else?
more feedback or guidance on distances, but,
No, I can do that.
okay. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right, so with that, why don't we move into the updates? So Deputy Mayor Blumetti, any update from the town council?
Yeah, just a few here, referring mainly to the October 22nd meeting. First, 4 updates. First is we had John Drake from Overcoat LLC visit us and speak to us for a little while. He is the consultant that is offered by the township to potential businesses that are interested in Sparta. He's aligned and meets with our business development committee. He gives guidance on zones, the application process, et cetera. A couple highlights that I just wanted to share with the board and the public is, first, it was refreshing to hear from Mr. Drake, who works closely with the business community here, saying that he doesn't agree with some of the anti-business perception that he's heard over months and months by some people. So that was refreshing to hear that from someone who is close to the business community. He talked about the very complimentary to our employees. He said they were very professional, kind, caring, especially in terms of the intake process. So that was well-deserved. He also was complimentary towards the reworked processes and forms to make things more user-friendly. He thought that was a big improvement. And he was also complimentary and thankful to the planning board and zoning board, just the timing and the operations of things and how greatly that's improved over the months. Interestingly, when he was asked about, does every municipality offer the kind of services that we provide through him, he said no. He said maybe one other that he's aware of. And finally, another positive comment, we asked him again about the site plan waiver subcommittee, and he did confirm that, we are one of the only few or only that he's aware of that offers that service. So I just wanted to share that. Overall, he was very complimentary, and it was good hearing from someone who is charged with working with the business community to make sure there's a positive perception out there. So I thanked him for that, and also our employees. Secondly, the council approved the annual best practices inventory. That's something that's done annually. It comes out from the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs. And it's a comprehensive list of best practices, of course, mainly around township operations and requirements around transparency and lots of other categories. If you'd like any more information on the document or the categories, please let me know. Third is, obviously, we council had a lengthy discussion around cannabis and the draft ordinance is. Finally, the council will be meeting to discuss affordable housing. We're going to meet with our planner and with Ursula from Tom Ryan's office to have discussion around the affordable housing numbers and what's going to be happening with that. And we're targeting to do that in the executive session in the next several weeks. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dunbar?
Yes, I have a report from our Environmental Commission, and this is from October 24th. And I'd like to share with all of you that we're starting a speaker series. And the speaker series will first we'll have our first event at our next meeting, November 14th at 7 p.m. And it will be about recycling in Sparta and at the Sussex County Municipal Authority. So we can find out all the latest about how not only what's going on with recycling in Sparta, but also how we can recycle things that aren't picked up curbside and where we can take them. And I have heard the speaker before, and she's excellent. So this will take place at our regular meeting on November 14th at 7 p.m. This series is being developed by our EC member, Christine Rogers. So, also, I was going to say, but I think we all know that our Trails Committee meetings are starting, and that will be tomorrow at 7 p.m. here. And let's see. I did want to mention one other thing. The Sussex County Farm Bureau is updating their farm preservation plan. It is very outdated, just like our master plan was. And I happened to just be curious about it, so I went to the meeting last month, and they're having a second meeting, but that's for municipalities. So I'm asked to invite Jim Zepp to the call, which is November 12th. One of the things that I noticed on the open space and recreation plan is that people want to see us preserve our land here in Sparta. And if we want to keep ourselves rural, that's the best way, one of the best ways we can do it, especially our farms. We only have about 5 farms in Sparta. So if we could go and if we could find out more about how to connect with the Sussex County Farm Bureau and what they're offering, maybe we could take advantage of it in the future. So that's my report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Dunbar. Okay, the Master Plan Subcommittee, so our last meeting was on October 29th. The team was focused on engaging on the community survey, trying to find as many different avenues as we can to get responses. I've actually just pulled up the site tonight, so as of right now, we have received 922 responses. So we're going to keep the push. Hopefully, we can get that number up even higher because, we're really focused on getting as much input from the community as we can. So everybody, please, if you haven't taken the survey, please do. If you see folks that you think may not have taken the survey, please remind them, and I know everybody's doing that. So thank you, everybody. We're also focusing on identifying and meeting with community stakeholder groups. I'll have more of an update on that in December. The Master Plan Subcommittee is going to meet twice in December. We couldn't find a date to pull something together in November, so we'll get 2 in December, and I'll update based on what comes out of there. So that's the end of what I have. Mr. Enright?
Yeah, Minor Site Plan Subcommittee, Ms. Derricks will be very happy. We approved our minutes for September. Granted, we didn't get any new applications in September, so it was fairly straightforward. But those minutes are approved. Risha continues to do a tremendous job, and we certainly appreciate also her support. And I believe our October minutes are close to being finalized, and we should have an update. We are up to 37 reviewed applications for the Minor Site Plan Subcommittee as of the September minutes. So we're doing a great job.
Okay, that concludes updates, unless anybody has anything that you'd like to offer that wasn't covered. All right, so that brings us to, we have a resolution for approval tonight. Resolution 2024-21, memorializing the approval of Planning Board Application 24-721 for Brainstone, located at 26 Gale Court Unit, Unit A, Block 12008, Lot 11, in the ED zone. Has everyone had a chance to take a look at it? And if so, would anybody like to make a motion to approve Resolution 2024-21?
I'll make a motion.
Can I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Does anybody have any comments or discussion that you'd like to introduce?
Question, isn't it 2024-22?
Did I say the wrong number, Celeste?
Yes.
Thank
I
you.
believe you said 21.
I did, thank you.
I think Dory changed it, or is changing it,
okay.
because it is, 22 is the next.
Yeah, on the
number.
actual resolution,
Yeah,
it says dash 22.
Okay. Okay, seeing no discussion, and I guess we take a roll call vote, please?
Deputy Mayor Dean Blumetti,
Yes.
Jeanette Burke. Yes. Joan Furman,
Yes.
Justin Canales,
Yes.
Celeste Luciano,
Yes.
Ernie Rackstack,
Yes.
Brian Zimmerman,
Yes.
Chairman Rondé.
Yes. All right, the motion to approve the resolution is passed, and that then gets us to the open to the public session. So anyone from the public has any comments that you'd like to make, please step up to the microphone and please state and spell your name.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a recommendation?
Yes,
Just
please.
on regarding cannabis comments. The topic for tonight and the scope was really just about potential areas for retail. There'll be numerous opportunities, and probably we want the whole council to hear comments around cannabis in general. I would just ask if people can keep that in mind.
Thank you. Okay.
Good evening. My name is Mark Scott, 9 Pueblo Parkway. Couple comments. I'm sure, as you're all aware, the DCA and the COA requirement numbers all came out a few weeks ago. I had a chance to read the document and still don't understand the math in it, but everything I've read says that this town should join the COA lawsuit as soon as possible. There are many other top-notch quality towns, such as Sparta, that are getting together and suing the DCA. And I think that we should start planning on joining that lawsuit as soon as possible. I think the cutoff on that, I'm not really sure when that is. Someone else may know that better than I, but I think it's like in the first quarter of.
So, Mr. Collins, I believe that type of decisions with the town council?
Yes.
Okay.
That would be up to the Township Council.
Okay. Well, then, thank you. I just also wanted to mention Barbara, that was here earlier, speaking to us all. Before she left, she did indicate that if we donate land into the state, that reduces our COA requirement. So that's just something we could think about.
That is, I don't think I heard Barbara say that.
No, well, she said it to me.
Oh, okay.
And there were
But that
several
is-
other witnesses to it.
I don't want to question Barbara, but donating land to the state does not reduce your COA obligation, or it's not COA anymore. Your DCA, A4 allocation obligation. It is, I totally agree with you, Mark. The math, it makes no sense, but that's what I have colloquially called COA math. Now I guess I can call it DCA math. It is a totally difficult system to understand, but that is the state of New Jersey legislative decision to have DCA use that formula from the Jacobson decision in Mercer County, and that has been imposed upon us. And that system does not reduce your obligation based upon how much land you dedicate to the state. But that, I'm not disagreeing with Barbara. I don't know what she said. There are other reasons to perhaps sell land to the state that we did hear about in the meeting, but that won't reduce the DCA allocation. So stay tuned. You're going to be very active in this in the next year, so still maybe let it become part of the transition, because it's very important to the governing body and the planning board. So
Another good reason to join the lawsuit. The other thing is I just wanted to talk about the marijuana thing. I mean, just what are we talking about here? The town council spoke about raising taxes and raising money with these shops. And then we're talking about enforcement. But the state is we're only going to get 2 cents from any retail sales. So let's just think about that. We're going to have a police officer looking at a monitor, watching for that kid with a hoodie, and that's going to cost about $100,000 a year for him to be watching that all day. And then there's benefits and costs and automobiles to get, and other items to get to the pot store to get the kid with the hoodie. And so there's $180,000 a year of cost to enforce what Ernie was talking about. We're going to have all kinds of people coming in this town. So we're going to spend $180,000 and we're going to earn 2 cents on the dollar. That means that we have to sell $9 million worth of pot. That means that everybody in this town, now these are just the voters, the 17,100 voters that we have in this town, all right? Everybody's going to have to start smoking $529 worth of pot per year. That's a huge number to make enough to pay for the guy to watch the monitor and to go to the store to look for the kid with the Sparta High School hoodie. So, I mean, are we going to bring marijuana into our town for $180,000 of revenue?
I appreciate the comments, but I think you recognize, in terms of this board and our role here, we can say it's consistent or not consistent, but the policy decision on whether you bring it in or not is really with the town council.
Okay, and I'm just asking you to be the rational backstop. Thank you.
Okay. Any other members of the public?
Jenny Derricks, 27 Mount Pleasant Road. Because it was brought up as a question from the dais, there are a number of resources that I can share with you from the Center of Prevention about your concerns. The concern about safety was brought up by me at the Township Council meeting. I asked specifically direct questions of the police chief. And I asked him specifically, do you need this ordinance in order to keep our town safe from illegal cannabis sales? And he unequivocally said no. Beyond that, since 1988, the drug-free school zones have established a setback of 1,000 feet. Why would we move it shorter? Just because with a stroke of a pen, we removed the wording from what, I forget the name, what it used to be called, the dangerous substance, and now it's cannabis. It's the same thing. It's still a drug. Why are we shortening that from 1,000 feet, which was established in 1988, all the way back to 400 feet?
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else from the public have comments?
Will this topic be discussed again by the planning board?
Well, when we get the ordinance back, again, when we'll get it back to look at it from a consistency perspective, not whether it's the right thing to do or not. I think those are the discussions that are probably best to be held at the town council level that makes the policy decisions. So, but we will be discussing it again from a consistency perspective. Okay. Does anybody else, any other questions? Okay, so seeing none, oh, one more.
Just wanted to say one thing. Fear comes
Can
from
you
a
share your
lack of knowledge.
Name and address, please.
My name is Devin Pupo, and I live on 139 West Shore Trail. And I just wanted to say that fear comes from a lack of knowledge and a state of ignorance. That's all I wanted to say.
All right, thank you for your comment. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, would somebody like to make a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, great, thank you, everybody. Have a great night and a safe trip home.